Hello, a very good morning. It's 7 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Jones and Frost.
With Anna and Wilf, a very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
Booster ignition and liftoff.
NASA launches its first crewed mission around the moon in more than 50 years.
The Artemis crew are on the first part of their 10-day mission and will be orbiting Earth in the hours ahead before heading to the moon.
Donald Trump claims his core objectives in Iran are nearly complete, but his speech rattles the markets with oil prices once again on the rise.
Also today, after mobs storm shops in South London and 3 teenage girls are arrested, we hear from a retail boss.
Plus, BBC DJ Scott Mills breaks his silence after being sacked from the BBC.
A very good morning to you. 2 huge stories will dominate our programme today: war and space.
Yes, today's news agenda encapsulates a triumph of human endeavour going into space against the backdrop of turmoil and conflict on Earth. So, a successful launch for the Artemis II, the first crewed mission to the moon in over 50 years. The crew saying we're going for all humanity. Also,
of course, the Iran war. Is there an end in sight? Well, President Trump says his core objectives are near completion after pledging the US would leave the country in 2 to 3 weeks. But the speech ultimately has been interpreted by the markets, at least, as not promising an off-ramp as soon as might have been expected.
So lots more on the latest developments in the Middle East in our programme, but let's start with some good, in fact, inspirational news.
A successful launch for Artemis II, paving the way for future missions to land on the moon. Here is our science correspondent, Thomas Moore.
4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff. The crew of Artemis II now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
NASA's most powerful ever rocket rose from Launch Pad 39B on a fiery tail. Its first flight with a crew on board, 4 astronauts having the ride of their lives.
Constantly on.
5 hours earlier, they were zipped into their survival suits. Victor Glover, Christina Cook, Canadian Jeremy Hansen, and their commander Reed Wiseman. They emerged from the building where they'd been quarantined in the run-up to launch, cheered by their families. A last chance for goodbyes, 4 humans leaving behind their earthly ties as they began their epic journey. They were greeted at the launch tower by the team that would strap them into the Orion capsule, no bigger than a camper van, and their home for the next 10 days.
For the entire crew, com check on Orion to Earth 1.
Then, with 10 minutes on the clock, the launch director, the first woman in charge of a moonshot, rallied the crew.
On this historic mission, you take with you the heart of this Artemis team, the daring spirit of the American people and our partners across the globe, and the hopes and dreams of a new generation. Good luck. Godspeed, Artemis II. Let's go.
10, 9, 8.
Then liftoff.
25 engines lit.
8 million pounds of thrust pushing the mammoth rocket skywards.
I can feel the rumble coming across the water there. Extraordinary sound. The vibrations in my chest. That bright light, the fiery trail. It's crackling. That is the most extraordinary sound. The crackle as the rocket powers off the ground. You can feel it in your chest. And the bright light, it's almost like the sun.
Technical problems forced the cancellation of launch plans earlier this year, but this was textbook. 8 minutes later, the main engines cut out, and they were in space. But the NASA chief can't relax yet.
What were your feelings watching your crew rising above Pad 39B? And do you feel that extra sense of responsibility for the crew as they head further into space?
it is far less stressful to be strapped into the rocket than to be responsible for it here on Earth. So I definitely had those feelings quite a bit. But, you know, you derive a lot of confidence from the process that leads up to this moment.
2 German astronauts had added interest in the launch.
Just seeing this rocket light up and then being 6 kilometers away, right? Sound takes almost 20 seconds until it arrives, and then when it's there, it just hits you like a sledgehammer. It rattles, it shakes you.
One of them will get the first European seat on a future mission, perhaps landing on the moon.
I'm just loving the smiles on your faces. So you really wanted to be on board, right?
Definitely. It's like it's a perfect adventure, and it's the beginning of a new era. I think most people don't realize, like, from today on, like, mankind will return to the moon.
The crew are on a 700,000-mile test flight to loop around the moon, already in an orbit far higher than the International Space Station. A chance to soak up the experience before heading into deep space later today.
It was an amazing ride uphill. The views, we've got 2 moon rises that we've had so far, and the views of planet Earth. We've circled it completely, and we forgot how beautiful it is to look down on Earth.
The mission has already made history. For the first time, a woman, a person of colour, and a non-American has left low Earth orbit. NASA is going back to the moon, this time far more representative of all humanity.
Well, let's cross live to Cape Canaveral. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore is there. Thomas, fantastic package. Amazing to see how you were feeling it all and watching it all unfold from fairly close up. I have to say, my then question is, it's sort of unfathomable to imagine what it must be like to have experienced it from in the tip of that rocket.
Yeah, and do you know what? They wouldn't really have known what to expect. I was chatting to those German astronauts about that, and with other rockets, because there are so many people who have been in it before, you know from what they say what you can expect. The sounds, everything groans with the G-forces on the structure. But with this one, this is the first time anybody's been inside, and they experienced it for the first time, and so it would have been quite extraordinary. They would have hit 4G, so 4 times their own body weight on the way up, and they would have felt extraordinarily heavy until that release of reaching zero gravity, and then of course they would have been able to unbuckle and float around the capsule that will be their home, and able to use the 3 dimensions. We think about, you know, the floor space of a camper van, but of course they can use the 3-dimensional space above their heads. And they have been busy, so they've already undocked the capsule from the rest of the upper stage in space, and they've flicked the manual switch, and they've taken it for a test drive and then redocked it and so on. So they're now in orbit, hopefully getting some sleep before they hit the button for this trans-lunar injection in about 18 hours. That's the burn that will take them up to a fast enough speed to escape the Earth's gravity and onward to the moon.
Extraordinary stuff, Thomas. And just give us a sense of how big a moment this is for space exploration.
Huge. This is the beginning of a new era of space exploration, and this time there is potentially no end to it. You know, we're going back to the moon, this time to build a moon base and explore and do the science and perhaps mine at some point in the future, first with NASA astronauts and their associates, including Europeans and from the UK too, but potentially commercial astronauts in the future too. And then onwards to Mars. And perhaps we do all this all over again with even bigger rockets and an even more mind-blowing experience.
Thomas, what's the agenda for today? And obviously the 10 days ahead, but in the very short term, what's ahead today?
Yeah, so they are not going to get very much rest. They're going to have to get themselves sorted to go ahead with this trans-lunar injection burn. And then once they're free of Earth's gravity, they have got a series of tasks. NASA wants to understand what the impact is of radiation coming from the sun, but also deep space, on the human body. They have got various rehearsals that they need to do for protecting themselves, so that they have a safe space within the capsule where they pile up water bags and food bags and all the other equipment, and they burrow themselves inside that. That can give them some protection. Because, of course, if we are going towards Mars, we could be in space for 5 or 6 months, and they really need to know how they can design a space capsule to protect astronauts without adding too much extra weight.
Amazing stuff, Thomas. Honestly, we've been so inspired by your coverage of this and the pictures themselves.
You sort of felt it.
Yeah, and
even
your
from back there.
enthusiasm.
You certainly felt it.
Absolutely. It's all been very infectious. And thanks very much indeed, Thomas.
To the war in Iran now, and President Trump has declared American forces will finish the job in Iran very shortly, saying the US's core objectives are nearing completion.
Yes, he made the comments during a 20-minute televised address from the White House, delivered directly to the American people, and he warned that the US would begin targeting Iran's energy infrastructure unless a deal is done to open the crucial Strait of Hormuz.
I've made clear from the beginning of Operation Epic Fury that we will continue until our objectives are fully achieved. Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Our correspondent Sally Lockwood is in Dubai for us. We'll go to Sally in just a moment. But first to our US correspondent Mark Stone in Washington. Mark, very good morning to you. Thanks for staying up to us. I guess the question I have is not so much what we heard, but what we didn't hear. There was quite a lot of expectations coming into this that he would signal a clear off-ramp, but we didn't get that.
No, we really didn't get that. In fact, it was. I suppose the first thing to say, Wilf, as you know, that these presidential addresses to the nation, my fellow Americans, and all of that. These are big moments. Prime time, 9 o'clock at night. The networks all carry it at the request, incidentally, of the White House. You know, going back many, many years, they are big moments where a president wants to tell the American people something. And so there was an expectation that President Trump might want to do that as well. But he didn't. In fact, it was confused. In one sense, he was saying the war's nearly done, the objectives are met, tick, 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 but we're going to hit them very, very hard for another 3 weeks. Then he talked about a deal, but he didn't say who the deal would be with, or indeed what the deal was, and why would there need to be a deal if the objectives of all the war aims have already been met? I mean, that clear confusion then. He talked again about the prospect of hitting Iran's energy infrastructure. That potentially is a war crime. Doesn't seem to bother him. In a sense, we got nothing new. What we did get was a repetition of what he has been saying on social media for quite a few weeks now. And, you know, it's worth pointing out, this is the first time he's addressed the nation in this setting from the White House since this war started a month ago. His war, a war of choice, and yet it's taken a month for him to, you know, in this setting, actually address the American people and try to answer the concerns and the questions that they and many other audiences, whether they be Gulf Arab countries or the Israelis or indeed the Europeans, may have.
Yes, is that what this was about, do you think, Mark? What was he trying to achieve?
I think he was trying to explain to people why he was doing this and why it was important, but he didn't come away. Certainly, I didn't get the sense that he had explained that the war aims had actually been achieved. I mean, as he was talking, there were saying that the ballistic missiles had been destroyed, Iran's capability to be a malign influence beyond its borders, that was pretty much done and dusted. Well, as he was saying that, ballistic missiles were raining down on Tel Aviv, and I think in Gulf Arab countries as well. Certainly the air raid sirens were going off. I think a lot of this was about trying to calm nerves. The stock market continuing to crash, the the oil price continuing to go up, and his polling is really very bad. And I think he's clearly very worried about that. I was just thinking, though, listening to what Thomas was saying from Cape Canaveral, wouldn't Donald Trump have liked a different world where this war had either genuinely been very quick and very successful or hadn't had to have happened at all, where Donald Trump could have been down in Florida basking in the glory that is actually NASA's, this great American moment. But he can't do that because he's stuck in this war that he decided to embark on, a war that is proving to be a whole load more difficult than he thought.
And he didn't dwell on that Artemis takeoff much. One wondered whether he timed it, even if it was from Washington, not from Florida, to coincide. But he didn't use it. Take much credit anyway in the start of that speech. Mark, as always, thanks so much, particularly for staying up late for us. Sally joins us as well, as we mentioned, from Dubai. I mean, there was one line in that speech, Sally, that said, if deals aren't reached in the weeks ahead, that the US would bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. I guess we've heard some of these types of comments before, but as Mark said, not in such a sort of high-profile way. How's it going down there?
Yeah, I don't think anything that we heard in Donald Trump's speech offered any sort of reassurance. As Mark was describing there, Donald Trump's messaging has a real disconnect when it comes to the reality on the ground. And an example I can give you, I was woken by an emergency alert for incoming missiles around half an hour before Donald Trump's speech, the second emergency alert of the night here in the UAE for incoming missiles. But it meant that I was awake and I could listen to Donald Trump's speech live at 5 a.m. here. And what I was listening out for was Donald Trump ruling out escalation, and that didn't happen. He said that they were going to go hard in Iran. They were going to continue to hit Iran extremely hard for the next 2 to 3 weeks. And he renewed that ultimatum that he's given Iran previously, that if they don't do a deal, then they will target energy infrastructure in Iran, that Mark described as a potential war crime if that were to happen. He renewed that threat, but without the deadline that he'd given before for this ultimatum, which was the 6th of April at 8 p.m. Eastern, which is Monday, Tuesday morning here and in the UK. But it does seem that potential deadline could be on the table. Certainly the threat is still there. And the concerning thing for this region is that Iran has said, if you do this, then we will strike back, we will retaliate and target critical energy infrastructure in the region, including potentially desalination plants, which this region is extremely reliant on for drinking water. So that is extremely concerning for Gulf states. And the other very concerning thing is, even if we don't see escalation, if we don't see Donald Trump potentially use those paratroopers and Marines that he's moved to the region in the last week, which is still very much on the table following Donald Trump's speech, if he decides that the war is over and hasn't fixed this issue when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, which was never a war goal in the first place, but it's become the defining issue for Donald Trump, and it's become rather embarrassing for him that he hasn't been able to solve this. And Iran is using this as such a powerful weapon in this war, not just to inflict pain on their enemies, but on the entire global economy. Well, that is also really bad news for Gulf states, who are hugely reliant on that for their oil and gas exports. And certainly there's an interesting story in the Financial Times today that officials and oil executives here are looking at using alternative pipelines to bypass the Strait of Hormuz and make these economies less vulnerable. That's good news if you're the UAE and Saudi. You have options, not if you're Qatar. But certainly it seems all options are on the table this morning following that speech. We heard nothing new there. And if you're looking at the oil prices, which have risen since Donald Trump's speech, it seems that the markets are banking on escalation.
Sally, thanks very much indeed.
Well, let's have a look at how the markets have reacted to that speech, and essentially no firm off-ramp being outlined. Indeed, indication that things would continue for 2 to 3 weeks at least. Oil prices have risen off the back of it to the tune of about 6% higher. Brent crude now sits at $107.50. There's the jump you're seeing overnight off the back of that speech. And of course, it follows quite a sharp fall that we saw 48 hours earlier when expectations started to rise that we would get a clear message from that White House address that we were heading towards some kind of off-ramp, and now most of the slide that we saw from that has dissipated. This chart, by the way, shows us the price of oil since just a few days before the war started. You can see, obviously, we're meaningfully higher, from under 70 to over 100 during that period of time. But you also get quite a good snapshot of these sort of expectations that things might draw to a close and how short-lived the sell-off in oil prices has been. This was in the early days of the war. We shut up, and then there was a comment, an indication that, oh, it'll only take a couple of weeks. We sold off. That was short-lived. This was the sell-off that we got off the back of a comment on Truth Social from President Trump 2 Mondays ago, nearly 2 weeks ago now, that peace talks had begun. Obviously, that was short-lived. And essentially, it's rinse and repeat. That's what we've now had in the last 48 hours. And just to highlight again, this chart goes back to the start of the war. If we just went back to the start of the year, oil prices were lower still. We're up 65% from the start of the year. That's how governments have tried to plan for the year ahead, how businesses have tried to plan for the year ahead, how people at home, and everything. Whether we're on one of the highs or one of the lows, you're talking 50, 60, 70% higher than the start of the year. So all those plans are off the table. Let's have a look at what equity markets have done overnight in response to this speech. It's, again, reversal of what we saw yesterday. There was a bit of hope out there yesterday, no longer there. So Japan down 2.5%. These are live prices. Korea, which we talked about yesterday, Korea fell 15% during the months of March, a big energy importer, particularly from stuff coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. Yesterday, on optimism, it bounced 8%. Today, giving up another 5%. Crazy volatility that we're seeing in some of these Asian markets. These are then just futures. They're not open yet, but there's a snapshot of what people in the stock markets of the US and the UK are thinking about the speech overnight, down, because oil prices are up. USA down more than 1%. The FTSE 100 expected to open down by about 1% when it opens in an hour. Let's just quickly look at borrowing costs, because that's been such an eye of the storm factor for the UK. These are one-year borrowing costs in the UK. Sharply higher, of course. We did see some reprieve as we approached that White House address from President Trump. Clearly, nothing that significant compared to the rise we've seen since the start. When we were at 3.5, we got up to 4.5. We're now down at about 4.3. We probably, therefore, won't see much of a ramp off the back of this, but we'll certainly still see these borrowing costs a lot higher than they were at the start of the war. Right, let's speak to the government now. We're joined by the Business and Trade Minister, Kate Dearden. Thanks so much for joining us. How dismayed are you by the fact that we had yet another speech and set of comments from the President that suggest this war will continue for at least a few more weeks?
Good morning. It's really great to be with you, and thank you for having me on your show this morning. This is, of course, a worrying time for people at home watching the news as this crisis has developed over this period of time, and as they wake up to the news to different announcements, and we really recognise that, and we're not blind to that, particularly people's concerns around the impact of the cost of living here at home and, of course, our interests abroad and in the Middle East. I'm really proud that we've got that calm, level-headed leadership from the Prime Minister, that he will act, and we as a government will act in our national interest to protect our interests abroad, support our allies, but of course protect people at home when it comes to the cost of living. So when we're looking to fuel prices to people's cost across their bills and across the board, we want to make sure that we absolutely are assessing the situation as it evolves daily and over the coming weeks and months. So we're absolutely on the side of the British people, that we can protect them during this crisis with the cost of living, to that longer term resilience of our energy market, to our wider economy, to make sure that we are more resilient and stable in the years ahead too.
We've seen other governments start to ask or force, depending which country we're talking about, their citizens to change behaviours. Rules have come in Korea. Yesterday, the Australian Prime Minister asked people not to use more fuel than they need. Any considerations of something similar for us?
There are no current supply issues, but of course we are assessing the situation, and governments, of course, plan for contingencies as well. Our situation is different to different countries, and they have, of course, reacted in different ways. And we will, as I said, continue to assess the situation and make sure that we can prepare as much as possible on the side of the British people, but always acting in our national interest. And the Prime Minister's been really clear on that. But I would stress there are no current supply issues. People should, over the Easter weekend, continue to fill up their cars and take those journeys if they are going for a short trip abroad over the coming days, or whatever plans they have, because we are absolutely, monitoring the situation, understand the concerns that people do have with the crisis and what's happening in the Middle East and what it means to them here at home. But they should know we're absolutely on their side. We will do everything we can to protect them, both abroad and here at home.
And you're announcing today help for people with some of their subscriptions.
Absolutely. And this is, of course, linked to cost of living too. For those who have unwanted subscriptions, it's making sure that they have more awareness and that businesses do comply in that respect. So give them notice, perhaps when a free trial is coming to an end, so people can decide if they want to leave that subscription, and to give them more control over their hard-earned cash. Every penny counts, every pound counts. So if you're not sure about a subscription, if you don't know how many subscriptions you're on, the new rules that we're introducing today give people absolutely more certainty, and businesses clear rules of how they should act going forwards, making them more aware of subscriptions, but making it as easy to leave a subscription as it was to join. It could save up to a significant amount of money for people, over 100 quid, 176 quid on average, depending on how many subscriptions you're on. And we think on average, people are on about 3 subscriptions. So these new rights will absolutely give people more control over their hard-earned cash, but make sure that you can leave a subscription and it should be as easy as when you join. So really welcome news for consumers all across the country today from the government.
That might be the case, Minister, on a normal day, but it's all relative. I mean, it's marginally welcome news, marginal impact on the cost of living relative to oil prices up 65%. It seems like an odd thing to try and be celebrating today. There was tones from the Prime Minister yesterday in his speech that feels like the government's not awake to the scale of the problem you guys face.
This is something we've been working on since we came into government, which is why we've announced it today. We consulted on it last year. But of course, this is not the only thing that we're doing when it comes to the cost of living crisis for people, whether it's responding to the current crisis and situation, as we have done with heating oil a few weeks ago, to assessing the situation every single day, to announcing the Crisis and Resilience Fund for local authorities across the country, up to £1 billion for them to decide how to spend in the interests of their local people and local need, as well as our longer term ambitions to help with the cost of living and make sure that our economy works for people. Our announcements yesterday on the national minimum and living wage, those increases are so welcome for so many people on those rates and will make a huge difference to their pay packets, to the freezing of fuel duty, prescription charges, and so much more. We are absolutely committed to the cost of living for people all across this country, and will continue to do so over time we're in government, and especially in responding to this crisis, but making sure that our economy is stable, back on tracks that benefits people and businesses all across the country.
Yeah, all sort of somewhat small and kind of out of date, though, I guess, in light of what's been happening. Just finally, in a conversation yesterday, Rachel Reeves suggested she was not against drilling in Rosebank and Jackdaw. Is that a topic that is openly being rediscussed within government?
Our manifesto was clear that oil and gas were part of the mix for years to come. Rachel is working closely with Ed and colleagues in the Energy Security and Net Zero department to invest in renewables. The licences that were granted before the election are currently being challenged in the courts, and our manifesto was clear that we'd honour those existing licences, but we are waiting for that process to complete. So more widely, we are absolutely hugely investing in renewables, and this crisis has just shown the volatility of relying on international energy markets, and we want to make sure we are more resilient, that we do have that homegrown energy here in the UK in the future, so we can rely on our own security when it comes to energy, to make sure that we do have that mix, and that's why we've been putting lots of investments into renewables, but we're really clear about the current situation, particularly for oil and gas and that energy mix for now and in the future.
Kate Didden, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Do stay with us. We're going to be talking about Artemis once again in just a moment and speaking to a professor of astrophysics and space science, so don't go away.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to. Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think?
It's really unusual.
Mornings with Richard and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
So it looks like we're back on the moon, Will.
By the way, this graphic is fabulous.
It's great. I feel like I'm up there with the astronauts. As you can tell, we're going back to our main story, a triumph of human endeavour, NASA's Artemis II mission.
The first crewed rocket to the moon in over 50 years has successfully launched and is now in orbit around the Earth.
Well, let's talk now to Britain's first woman astronaut, Helen Sharman.
First British astronaut.
First British
or both.
astronaut. Both. So many things to celebrate with you. Helen Sharman, really lovely to see you. Thanks so much. So this is the first time that NASA has sent astronauts to the moon since the 70s. So how big a moment do you think this is?
This is really, I think, the beginning of a new phase, isn't it? So this is not just about returning to the moon and ultimately landing on the moon, although this mission won't land, of course. It will just go round, test the spacecraft and return to Earth. But yes, in the future, we're looking forward to people landing on the moon and living there, so establishing some sort of moon base, and then ultimately thinking about going to Mars. So yeah, lots of excitement, lots of science to do there, lots to discover, and lots to dream about as well.
When you say people living there, you mean NASA people and scientists to do research, not people living there?
Well, I mean, in the first instance, not just NASA people, but actually international. I can see an international moon base. It really should be international. There probably will be a few different bases of, say, conglomerates of various nation states who've decided to work together on different bases. But we should be working more collaboratively, actually. If we're going to be generating energy there, if we're going to be generating water, for instance, making rocket fuel, oxygen to breathe, maybe we could have one resource that we make on the moon for everybody. But no, I think when you're thinking about, is it going to be career astronauts or is it going to be anybody who might like to pop up to the moon? Perhaps not quite anybody, but perhaps actually people whose job it is to do something else, but then it would be useful for them to go and make that new material on the moon. And so they will be then seconded to perhaps a few months on the moon rather than the factory down the road.
Fascinating. And watching the launch yesterday, watching those astronauts lift off into space, how did you feel? And did it bring back memories for you?
Honestly, I was sort of gripping my seat as I was watching. The launch, the whole countdown started, for a couple of days before, really, and everything seemed to be going amazingly smoothly, considering that there'd been problems in the previous two launch attempts. So there appeared to be no horrible hydrogen leaks, no horrible helium leaks. Everything seemed to be going fine. And then about an hour before, there seemed to be some problem with the launch abort system, that NASA couldn't communicate with it. They needed to communicate to test it. And this is something that happens if something goes wrong with the rocket and it looks like it might be going to fall over a large population in Florida. Then, of course, the astronauts will first of all be pulled away from it, but the whole rocket will be actually destroyed as well. So not so much just the launch abort, but then particularly this flight termination system. And this is the bit that they had the problem communicating with specifically. Somebody in one of the the teams decided, remember, that they had some legacy hardware from an old shuttle mission. They scurried off to another building to find it, and that was what communicated with, ultimately, specifically the flight termination system. Later on, there was a battery to do with the actual launch abort system. But anyway, finally, it did all go. So, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But thrilling, really thrilling what they're going to be doing.
Fantastic.
Thrilling indeed. Well, Helen, great to have your perspective, and great that you're sticking around with us all morning, because we'll be hearing from Helen throughout the show, but in a special programme as well that we'll be doing at 9:30, dedicated final half an hour of the morning's programme today on all of this.
So let's stay with the launch. We're going to speak now to Professor of Astrophysics and Space Science at the University of Leicester, Martin Barstow. Now, a very good morning to you. Again, give me your sense of perspective on this whole project. Just how significant a moment is this?
Well, it certainly feels like a new era. I grew up during the Apollo missions, although I was very young, but it's what inspired me into space science and astronomy. And ever since then, I've been looking forward to human beings going further out into the solar system. But it's a challenging thing to do. And you've got to build up a lot of infrastructure to support that. And this idea of going back to the moon as a first step to going out into the solar system is a really important piece of work. And it's going to take years. It's already taken several years to get to the second flight of Artemis, and we're still just testing out the infrastructure and making sure it works reliably enough so that it's safe. Because this is a really dangerous journey. You're out in the vacuum of space when you're on your way to the moon. The moon is a tremendously harsh environment. You can't just pop out down the road for a cup of tea or for spare parts if things go wrong. You've got to be able to be very self-sufficient on the surface while you're actually undertaking, say, scientific research or engineering developments. Helen mentioned manufacturing water and fuel, and those are some of the things that we're going to be trying out on the moon in the next few years.
What are the sort of unique aspects about this particular trip? What exactly will they be doing that either hasn't been done before or is setting the groundwork for what hasn't been done before?
Well, what they're really doing is testing the whole system for the first time with people on board. And once you put people into a spacecraft like this, it becomes a whole different game because you've got to protect them, you've got to keep them safe. Sadly, we have lost astronauts over the years in various accidents, and we don't want to do that again. They may well be travelling a bit further than any humans because they're taking a big loop around the moon. They're not going into orbit around the moon. Very similar flight to this, Apollo 8, way back in 1968, was the first test flight to actually put astronauts into orbit. But it didn't go out quite as far as this one is going to go. And so they're going to loop back around and maybe the human beings that have travelled furthest away from the Earth ever. So that's the really unique aspect. But to an extent, it's a repeat of what Apollo did. It's testing those systems and it's putting us in a position to actually make a landing in a couple of flights' time.
So give us an idea of what the astronauts are likely to be doing now and what they'll be doing over the next 10 days.
At the moment, they're in orbit around the Earth. They're in a fairly deep orbit that lasts about a day, and the couple of orbits that they will take are times to actually test out the systems. Everything seems to be going really well. The solar panels deployed properly. They've made a couple of burns of the engine that's attached to the capsule just to make sure that everything is working. But they're going to go through a whole series of checks now, testing everything out and making sure that everything's secure and safe to actually embark on the journey. Once they're actually on that flight to the moon, they'll be carrying out further tests and they'll be doing some science along the way.
What's the most dangerous moment of the next 10 days?
Coming back. The splashdown at the end of the flight is a really critical moment. They have to survive entry into the Earth's atmosphere. The command module has a heat shield, but they're coming out faster than Apollo did. So it'll be the fastest travelling object ever entering the Earth's atmosphere. And that's the really dangerous bit. They've got to get the entry trajectory just right so that they don't overheat and that the heat shield protects the capsule enough to make it all the way through the atmosphere until the point at which the parachutes open and then the capsule can splash down into the Pacific Ocean.
Give us a sense of the scale of the work that's gone into this, the money that's gone into this, the preparation that's gone to this, and the sense of relief there must be that this launch has gone off smoothly.
Yeah, I mean, going to the moon is a really expensive trip. And it's going to cost billions and billions of dollars and pounds and euros. We're all part of this. The European Space Agency has contributed the service module to the mission, which is what keeps the astronauts alive and allows them to travel to the moon and back again. So it's a really long-term endeavour, but obviously it's a huge relief that the mission got off with relatively small number of issues. It's a big, complex vehicle that they're flying, so it's not a surprise that there aren't a few sort of niggles during the countdown, but I would say this was very smooth, and it allows us to develop a sense of optimism for the future to see this work. And of course, there are other contributions coming along. SpaceX has its own large rocket, and I think we're beginning to see the new era when we have several ways of getting to the moon, and in the way that we have several ways of getting to the space stations, so that it becomes a more integrated endeavour from a whole slew of people across the planet.
Well, Professor Martin Barstow, it's really good to talk to you this morning, and thanks so much for sharing your insights into this extraordinary launch. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
To the war in Iran now. President Trump gave that televised address to the nation overnight, saying his objectives are nearing completion, but didn't promise an end anytime soon.
Yeah, in the president's first primetime speech in defence of the war, he also said the US will finish the job in Iran soon, but that Iran would continue to face a barrage of attacks in the short term. Well, let's get more on this. We're joined now by former Pentagon defence official Alia Awadallah. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. What do you make of Donald Trump's address? What did you feel was most noteworthy about it?
I would say that the president clearly laid out an intent to start wrapping up the war. It's just a question of what that looks like exactly. So we should definitely expect to see an uptick in operations over the next 2 to 3 weeks, but then perhaps we may have an update on what the next steps are and hopefully look to see a resolution in the near future. The most interesting aspect of the speech was commentary related to the Strait of Hormuz and the impact on global energy prices. The president indicated that he believed that the attacks on the strait would naturally resolve themselves as there was some type of resolution to the conflict. Presumably that means that Iran would halt its attacks on vessels passing through the strait. Some will be skeptical of that and will be looking for more specifics about the United States' plan to reopen the strait, and also more fidelity on the president's calls for partners to take action on their own fronts just to secure energy supplies passing through the strait.
I'm interested, you clearly, it sounds like, have a slightly more optimistic interpretation of him suggesting we're nearer the end than, say, the oil price move suggests this morning. But nonetheless, do you conclude that we have at least 2 to 3 weeks more fighting?
Yes, absolutely. And I should reinforce that we still don't know exactly what will happen after that 2 to 3 week period. We would still be looking for signs of a diplomatic resolution or some other off-ramp to the conflict. But just purely based on the president's commentary last night, that does seem to be his desire and intent to conduct operations over the next 2 to 3 weeks and then look for some type of resolution.
He said, again, as you mentioned, that he didn't need the Hormuz Strait. America didn't need its oil to come through the Strait, and that other countries would have to go and take their oil from there. But he didn't repeat his threats over pulling out of NATO. How much of a relief will that be to his NATO allies? What will they have made of this speech?
Well, I imagine that it will be quite a relief. Of course, the commentary that happened earlier this week is still out there, and so that will certainly cause friction with NATO and European partners. But for now, it seems like those conversations have moved to a more private setting, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio meeting with G7 partners and asking them to support operations to reopen the strait. We don't have the full details of what that request looked like, but it does seem like the administration has chosen to carry out more of those conversations in a private setting and with potentially less inflammatory or immediate language around changing the nature of the NATO alliance for the time being.
Do you think, though, that going forward, I mean, if we pivot away from the Strait and think about Ukraine, moving forward, the US is really less engaged, less committed than it's been ever before to European interests like Ukraine?
I think that's an outstanding question. The relationship has definitely changed, and the fundamental relationship is altered, I think, for the time being in the decade to come. But we'll just have to continue monitoring what the president said about his intent to continue working with NATO partners. I don't believe that we have enough details right now to indicate what exactly might happen and what changes might take place in concrete terms.
He laid out how he thought that the US was achieving its aims and said the war was nearing completion. What do you think Israel will make of that? Will they agree?
As of now, Israel has been willing to go farther than the United States in a lot of aspects of this war, in terms of its desire for continued operations and appetite to absorb any risks that come with that. But it does seem like both from the Israeli perspective and from the U.S. perspective, the military campaign at a tactical level has been a resounding success. Iran's military capabilities, which were already weakened before this war, are even further degraded. Their missile strike abilities are degraded. And for the time being, it does seem like it's been a very successful operation, and that should be a shared perspective between the U.S. and Israel.
Alia, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
4p bags of carrots.
Apparently so.
Have you got yours?
No.
Well, we'll be speaking
get organised
to a vegetable grower in Kent. Is that the official term? I'm not sure that it is, but they can correct it for us. With my apologies, when we come back.
Mr. Hexton, does your past behaviour make you unfit to serve?
Did you stay at the apartment in Manhattan of Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm not answering any questions.
David Cameron says that you should vote through funding for Ukraine. What do you say to that?
I really don't care what David Cameron has to say.
When you said you were from Sky News, I just got very excited.
Mr. Patel, did you endanger public safety when you said the killer was in custody? I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now. It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon. Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armory. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on. A lot of heat still. We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target. Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Getting up close and personal with a rhino. This is what makes the job so fantastic.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond. You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Welcome back. Now, a group of major UK supermarkets have joined together to offer bags of vegetables, such as carrots and potatoes, for just 4p.
Yeah, and that might sound great for your purse, but what does that mean for the farmers who grow the food that you put on your plate? Well, joining us now is David Catt, who's a fruit and vegetable wholesaler from Kent. Very good morning to you. Thanks for talking to us. I mean, Wilf and I were sort of raising our eyebrows, hadn't realised that there was this sort of supermarket price war that is selling some vegetables for as little as 4p. But yeah, we'll put the question to you. What does that mean for growers like you?
Basically, it's putting British farmers out of business. They did this promotion at Christmas as well. And the problem is with these prices, it bears no comparison to what the produce costs to grow. It disrupts the market pricing in the marketplace because the independents trying to compete will push the price down, and it just puts growers out of business. And that's okay in the short term. You get a bargain today, but you'll pay for it tomorrow, because, I mean, at the moment, I've just been to the market this morning, because we run a wholesale fruit and vegetable business here on the farm as well, and I've been doing that for nearly half a century, and the prices of some of the products now that we're importing are astronomical, basically through weather conditions in southern Europe, and also the Iran war is delaying flights, so produce out of Africa is not getting here. So some of the prices are very, very expensive this weekend.
David, can I just ask, so on, I mean, clearly I get the point that long term you guys need obviously a good price to keep your business going. Am I wrong, though, in assuming this is what supermarkets are doing on their pricing, and they still buy it off you guys for a relatively normal price, and then they just decide to take a loss on one or two products to get people through the door?
No, the growers take the loss. To get the contracts, the growers have to sort of wear the premium prices or the prices they do for their offers. And farm incomes, to be honest, a lot of products this year, dairy farms are disappearing at an increasing rate. Cereal prices are the lowest they've been for 20 years. Potato prices are really low. The farm gate prices are very, very low. And the country needs to wake up that the farming industry is on its knees at the moment. And if they keep pushing and pushing, they're going to destroy us. And the problem is, since Brexit, basically, we have no current viable food policy in the country. It's just allow the supermarkets to do what they want to do. And they're so big and powerful and wieldy, and they pressurise even big firms. Because a few of my friends are very big soft fruit growers, made huge losses on their soft fruit production this year, and apples as well, huge losses on their apples. This is not sustainable. And the problem is, if we start running short of food and we have to import it all, we can then be held to ransom. And for our food security, we need to look after our English growers. We really do.
You referenced very briefly there the Iran war. There have been concerns about getting hold of fertiliser or fertiliser prices going up because there's less coming in our direction. Is that something that you're concerned about at all?
Oh, absolutely. Fertiliser's trebled in price. Our diesel for our tractors has trebled in price. And the effect on whether people will grow produce this year because of the costs involved. I mean, potatoes are a very heavy fertiliser-rich crop to grow. You have to put a lot of fertiliser on potatoes to get the yields. So you've got a massive expense in there. And if the potatoes aren't going to make the money at the end of the season, are people going to take the risk? So we're going to get sort of massive market fluctuations because of an unstable situation at the moment.
Finish your thought.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
It's very concerning, to be honest. I mean, I've been wholesaling for, say, nearly half a century, and the prices, some of the prices at the moment are very, very high because we don't produce it in this country any longer. And without any controls on the supermarkets, it's going to get more and more difficult. The problem is because the growers as individuals can't dictate to them at all. There's no control on what they pay for us, because on the continent, they're not allowed to sell products at a loss.
David, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear the farmers' perspective there. But obviously for consumers who are seeing prices so high for food and warnings that they could go higher still as a result of the war, you can see why, you know, when supermarkets offer low prices, it's very appealing.
I mean, if you park the very temporary price war to get people through the door for Easter, I think it's another one of these conversations we have that shows the pain to come from the Iran war that perhaps is a little bit underappreciated at the moment, and it's going to be tough.
Anyway, appreciate hearing from David Catt. Good luck to him. Do stay with us. All the top stories coming your way in just a moment.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Jones and Frost.
With Anna and Wilf, good morning from me as well. Lots going on today.
Booster ignition and liftoff.
NASA launches its first crewed mission around the moon in more than 50 years.
The Artemis crew are on the first part of their 10-day mission and will be orbiting Earth before heading to the moon.
President Trump claims his core objectives in Iran are nearly complete, but his speech rattles the markets, with oil prices once again on the rise.
Also today, after mobs storm shops in South London and 3 teenage girls are arrested, we hear from a retail boss.
And BBC DJ Scott Mills breaks his silence after being sacked from the BBC.
Hello, a very good morning. Thanks for joining us. So, two huge stories dominating our programme today: war and space.
Yeah, today's news agenda encapsulates a triumph of human endeavour going into space against a backdrop of turmoil and conflict on Earth.
So a successful launch for the Artemis II, the first crewed mission to the moon in over 50 years. The crew saying we're going for all humanity.
Also, of course, we'll be covering the Iran war. Is there an end in sight? Well, President Trump says his core objectives are near completion after pledging the US would leave the country in 2 to 3 weeks. But his address overnight from the White House failed to reassure the markets, at least. Oil prices once again rising sharply, about 7% today, above $100 per barrel.
So lots more on the latest developments in the Middle East in our programme, but let's start with some good and, in fact, inspirational news.
A successful launch for Artemis II, paving the way for future missions to potentially land on the moon. Here's our science correspondent, Thomas Moore.
Lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff. The crew of Artemis II now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
NASA's most powerful ever rocket rose from Launch Pad 39B on a fiery tail. Its first flight with a crew on board, 4 astronauts having the ride of their lives.
Constantly on.
5 hours earlier, they were zipped into their survival suits. Victor Glover, Christina Cook, Canadian Jeremy Hansen, and their commander Reed Wiseman. They emerged from the building where they'd been quarantined in the run-up to launch, cheered by their families. A last chance for goodbyes, 4 humans leaving behind their earthly ties as they began their epic journey. They were greeted at the launch tower by the team that would strap them into the Orion capsule, no bigger than a camper van, and their home for the next 10 days.
For the entire crew, ComCheck on Orion to Earth 1.
Then, with 10 minutes on the clock, the launch director, the first woman in charge of a moonshot, rallied the crew.
On this historic mission, you take with you the heart of this Artemis team, the daring spirit of the American people and our partners across the globe, and the hopes and dreams of a new generation. Good luck. Godspeed, Artemis II. Let's go.
10, 9, 8.
Then liftoff.
25 engines lit.
8 million pounds of thrust pushing the mammoth rocket skywards.
I can feel the rumble coming across the water there. Extraordinary sound. The vibrations in my chest. That bright light, the fiery trail. It's crackling. That is the most extraordinary sound. The crackle as the rocket powers off the ground. You can feel it in your chest. And the bright light, it's almost like the sun.
Technical problems forced the cancellation of launch plans earlier this year, but this was textbook. 8 minutes later, the main engines cut out, and they were in space. But the NASA chief can't relax yet.
What were your feelings watching your crew rising above Pad 39B? And do you feel that extra sense of responsibility for the crew as they head further into space?
It is far less stressful to be strapped into the rocket than to be responsible for it here on Earth. So I definitely had those feelings quite a bit. But, you know, you derive a lot of confidence from the process that leads up to this moment.
2 German astronauts had added interest in the launch.
Just seeing this rocket light up and then being 6 kilometers away, right? Sound takes almost 20 seconds until it arrives, and then when it's there, it just hits you like a sledgehammer. It rattles, it shakes you.
One of them will get the first European seat on a future mission, perhaps landing on the moon.
I'm just loving the smiles on your faces. So you really wanted to be on board, right?
Definitely. It's like it's a perfect adventure, and it's the beginning of a new era. I think most people don't realize, like, from today on, like, mankind will return to the moon.
The crew are on a 700,000-mile test flight to loop around the moon, already in an orbit far higher than the International Space Station. a chance to soak up the experience before heading into deep space later today.
It was an amazing ride uphill. The views, we've got 2 moon rises that we've had so far, and the views of planet Earth. We've circled it completely, and we forgot how beautiful it is to look down on Earth.
The mission has already made history. For the first time, a woman, a person of colour, and a non-American has left low Earth orbit. NASA is going back to the moon, this time far more representative of all humanity. Thomas Moore, Sky News, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Well, Sky Science and Technology editor Tom Clark is here with us. Morning to you, Tom. First, though, let's bring in British astronaut Helen Sharman. Hi there, Helen. Welcome back again. So tell us how you felt watching these 4 astronauts blast into space last night. How big a moment was it for you?
I don't think any astronaut would say that they would not have wanted to be there themselves. You know, it's just thrilling to see what they're doing, but also this amazing new rocket. I mean, this has flown into space once before without people in it, and now there are 4 people that have ridden it. So yes, so the sort of the technology and the speed with which this sort of program seems to be advancing really very fast.
And you say you wish it was you.
Oh yes.
Why? What is it about that moment?
It's not just the launch, actually. I mean, the launch is just the beginning, right? So for astronauts, it's the beginning of this, however long you're in space for. The launch, you have to get through it. And although it is a bit of a ride, you know that actually it's more of a ride returning to Earth, so that's a separate thing. For everybody watching on Earth, of course, the launch is the thing that we see. And then as soon as the rocket gets lost in the clouds, you can't hear it anymore. Well, you go home and make a cup of tea, right? Yes. But for the astronauts, they're just starting. I mean, now they've been in space for or they've been feeling weightless, right? So for about 12, well, not even that really, so a few hours. So their bodies are starting to adapt. So they've got that physical adaptation, as well as all the stuff that they've got to do with their new spacecraft. So yeah, it's just, they're really busy right now.
And Tom, remind us what's on the agenda. So they've completed Earth's orbit, or they've done part of that? What's next?
You're testing my knowledge of the speed of the orbit, but yeah, they're doing a low Earth orbit first. They got busy straight away after they got into orbit by separating from the propulsion stage that took them up there and doing some dummy docking, parking procedures. So this is something they don't need to do for this mission. It's not necessary, but in future missions, they're going to have to join the Orion capsule to a waiting landing craft to take astronauts down onto the lunar surface for subsequent missions. They need to rehearse that, check the thrusters on all these things work. On the European Service Module, the thing that was built here in Europe by European engineers to test that system is working properly and all those. So they've got that out of the way. Then I think they're asleep right now. I think they've got some time, this is downtime. They're sleeping in orbit. Then that propulsion stage is going to boost them into a very high Earth orbit. And I think 2 of the astronauts, Commander, I think Victor Glover, are on the exercise bike, which they're unpacking. It's a kind of flywheel type contraption. It's like a mini gym, because it's not really a kind of space station type thing, but they want to test out.
And it's a small space.
It's very small, very cramped. It's like, I had a look around some of the visuals. It's like a sort of very small caravan with a toilet in the floor. It's quite bizarre. And then they're preparing for the next really big mission critical step, which is called this trans-lunar injection burn, which is the sort of the firing of the thrusters on that service module to point them at the moon. And the acceleration they get from that, and that they've already got from going around the Earth, is what's going to get them all the way to the moon itself. So that's not a critical step. They've got to hit that exactly on the mark.
And Helen, how much jeopardy?
Am I right? Helen? I mean, I'm saying all this in the presence of an astronaut.
No, but
I feel like
sounds great. But of course, remember that although it might seem cramped to you when we look at it with our Earth eyes, right, when you've got 3 dimensions to float around in, suddenly you're using all the volume. So actually, it's not as bad as it seems.
Because the walls become the floor, and
yes, and you know, and Christina, for instance, I understand that when she's sleeping, she's decided that her feet are going to be in the docking port, and her head will be sort of hanging, they don't hang, but her head will be down, pointing down towards the other 3, and they will sort of have their sleeping bags tied across the spacecraft.
So they can stretch out.
So, well, yes, they can stretch out, but, you know, it's just so relaxing, and the human body is so adaptable.
So they're really, this is probably, I've had to preface so many of my questions the last couple of days with this might be a very stupid question, but there really is no direction.
You don't feel as though there's a direction until perhaps you open your eyes and realise that, of course, the spacecraft itself will have different things on the ceiling, different things on the floor, for instance, the toilet being underneath the floor for them this time. But no, if you keep your eyes closed, you have no idea. Now, I remember waking up in the morning, first thing, and in that split second before I'd opened my eyes, I was sure I'd turned upside down, because the fluid pressure gradually we have more fluid comes to our upper chest and the head in the first few days of being in space as we adapt to not having this fluid pulled down to our feet by gravity. That pressure is the only thing that my brain was getting a signal from to say which way up or down was I. And so I thought I'd turned upside down in my sleep until I opened my eyes and thought, oh, stupid, of course I'm not upside down.
I find it extraordinary that anyone can sleep when there's so much going on and it's so
10
exciting.
days, though, you're going to need
You get tired, yes, you get tired. And I'm sure they will be sleeping right now, as Tom said. They've got the 4 hours of sleep, then they'll be woken up, do this small burn, and then they'll be back to sleep again. Oh, they'll sleep well, I'm sure.
And it's an intimate space, but they know each other incredibly well, don't they, these 4 astronauts?
Yes, and they've trained together for so long. They've done sleepovers inside the Orion spacecraft, in the mock-up, of course. And so, yes, and they know each other's families, they know each other's foibles, they'll be able to pretty much tell what each other's thinking. And that's lovely. And I remember feeling like that with my crew as well. And you don't feel as though you need to have or want to have secrets or you know, nothing bugs you really. You're just open and honest, and it's a lovely, very friendly, but a working relationship.
Tom, what's the most important thing that they've got to achieve on this mission?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think ultimately they have to splash down safely in the Pacific Ocean. That's what they want to achieve. But NASA has.
Is that the moment of most jeopardy?
Now the launch is out of the way, and that was without a hitch. Yes, I think it's fair to say that will be the most, nerve-wracking time for 2 reasons. They're going to be coming into re-entry a lot faster than any astronauts have done from low Earth orbit. In fact, they probably will be going slightly faster than the Apollo astronauts when they returned from the moon. So that puts a huge amount of stress on the vehicle, because they've got to lose a lot of that speed as they go through the atmosphere. That heats the vehicle up a lot. With the test of the Orion spacecraft, one of the problems they identified, and one of the reasons this mission's been delayed by 2 years now, if not more, because the delays sort of stacked up onto each other, they had to do a complete overhaul of the heat shield on the Orion spacecraft. They can't test that in real life. They put it through as many possible tests they can on Earth to check that what they identified as the problems with the heat shield have been eliminated. But as Helen was saying, this rocket hasn't flown before, this system hasn't flown before with humans in it, so they will be keeping a very close eye on that heat shield. So I think that's going to be a moment of jeopardy, but they wouldn't be putting them in it if they weren't 0.9% sure it's going to work fine. And actually, to be fair, if they had been in the the first test Orion capsule, they would have the vehicle stayed intact. It was just didn't look good.
Helen, I don't want to underplay how amazing this particular mission is. How much harder, though, is it for the next step to then land on the moon?
That is a really big deal, landing. I think this precision that you have to do, and if you want to crash land, sort of slam your spacecraft in, relatively easy. But of course, we don't want to do that. We want to land safely. That's going to be a big deal. So, as Tom was saying, what they're doing, or they've just done recently, a few hours ago, is do this test of a docking. So they're going to have to, in lunar orbit, dock onto another spacecraft that will be the lander that will take them down onto the lunar surface. So that precision docking is one thing, but then the actual landing, and this is just still taking so long to develop, and we need this to ramp up, because otherwise we're not going to get onto the surface of the moon. We can get into lunar orbit, but not actually down there.
How does another aircraft get there, spacecraft? Well, we're using the wrong terminology.
A similar way, right? So
it's unmanned.
They have to put it into orbit first. So this is for reasons we haven't got time to get into now. The Space Launch System was built without the capacity, as it currently configured, to get a lander and the spacecraft all the way to the moon. They're going to have to put a landing system in orbit around the Earth. They then, or in orbit around the moon, but I think the choice they're going to do is around the Earth. They're going to take that, or are they going to do it in the moon? It's all a bit up in the air, but
literally.
That's right.
Well, no air around the moon.
They're going to send a lander to orbit the moon, and dock with that and then take it down to the surface and then come back into lunar orbit, get back in the Orion capsule and come back. They basically have to change trains outside there. Important things to mention, they're trying to go further than the Apollo missions did. They're not taking just a little rickety lander down onto the surface. Sorry, it was a wonderful machine, but compared to what they're doing...
It was quite a good machine.
It was an amazing machine, and it did its job perfectly multiple times. They're trying to do something much bigger and better here. They're trying to get enough personnel and cargo and equipment down onto the south pole of the moon, where we've never landed before. That takes a lot more effort and equipment, much more sophisticated landing vehicle. So they're trying to do a lot more, so that's hard. And it's also important to say neither of those landers are ready yet.
No.
And they're currently targeting 2028 to try that. So I think we're going to, either things are going to really ramp up or we're going to maybe not
see that
hit
deadline,
that 2028 deadline. But let's see.
2028.
They've certainly sped up a lot.
Resources have been diverted.
That's true. They have reconfigured a lot to try and make this work, but they've got a lot to get through. They've got to demonstrate those landing craft and things first. But
Tom,
it's very exciting.
Helen, awesome stuff. Thanks so much. Don't
See
go
you
far.
later.
We'll be dragging you both back on set again. We've got a special programme next at 9:30, full half an hour to wrap up mornings. More to come on Artemis II.
Now to the war in Iran, and Donald Trump has declared American forces will finish the job in Iran very shortly, saying the US's core objectives are nearing completion.
He made the comments during a 20-minute televised address from the White House delivered directly to the American people, and warned that the US would begin targeting Iran's energy infrastructure unless a deal is done to open the Strait of Hormuz.
I've made clear from the beginning of Operation Epic Fury that we will continue until our objectives are fully achieved. Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
National Affairs Editor Dominic Waghorn has joined us. Sky Sally Lockwood is standing by in Dubai as well. Dominic, your interpretation of whether this was... Very good morning, by the way. Good to see you.
Good morning, Wilf.
Your interpretation of whether this was a commitment to wind things down, which was sort of where people had got to in terms of expectation, or whether the takeaway from this is at least 3 more weeks of this war.
Yeah, and we have heard that a number of times, haven't we? And I think we're beginning to kind of disregard any kind of timeline that the president puts on this. I think it was confirmation of a president who seems to be wanting a way out but can't find the exit. I think in terms of good news for people worried about this getting worse, there wasn't a repeat of that threat to pull out of NATO that he made to a British newspaper yesterday. He seemed to rule out troops on the ground in terms of any kind of risky operation to get the uranium, the enriched uranium, out of Iran. There have been talks of a plan to do so, and he kind of ruled that out, saying that's deep underground and it's going to be observed by satellites, and if the Iranians go after it, they're going to hit Iran again, which is kind of where we were before the war began. He says the core objectives have been reached, but he said Iran is no longer a threat. And I think the problem here is that he has this he seems to not have a grasp of the balance of power in the war now. When the war began, Iran was making about 4 to 5% of the world's oil, had control of that. It now, thanks to the conflict and the position it's put Iran in, has control of 1/5 of the world's oil. Now, that gives Iran enormous power. It means Iran's unlikely to negotiate a way out of this except for very high terms that the Americans don't seem prepared to give. And I think what we were looking for, and I think what markets were looking for, was whether the president has a grasp of that, and whether, if he does, he's got a prescription for that, whether he's got a solution for it. And his only solutions seem to be either sort of wishful thinking, saying the Iranians want to make a deal. There's no sign that they are in the mood for making a deal at the moment, but also his alternative is bombing Iran back to the Stone Age, which is sort of verging on threatening war crimes. And I think his answer for this is to bomb them and bomb again, and that's not currently working. And that's the fundamental problem. The markets don't like the speech. He doesn't have a solution in terms of that grip they have with the Strait of Hormuz. And even if he walks away from this, Iran retains that control. And I think that's a fundamental dilemma for him, politically, because the price of oil is going to stay very high. And that's very perilous for him in the run-up to the midterm elections. But for the rest of us, it's extremely calamitous in terms of where the economy could be going. And we have an American president who seems prepared now to continue with this war with no real idea of how to get himself out of this mess.
Very quick question. What will Israel make of it?
I think Israel will be happy to see that he's prepared to talk carry on waging this war and talk about waging it for another few weeks. And he's not. He may be looking for a way out, but he doesn't seem to know where that exit is. And I think for the Israelis, they want this to continue until Iran is decimated militarily, potentially politically, but also, I think, economically. So the longer it goes on for Israel, the better. I think, it's not too cynical to suggest the Israelis would like to see Iran reduced to sort of chaotic, failed state status. Now, that wouldn't be good for the region, for the rest of the region. It wouldn't be good for the world either, potentially. But that's probably what Israel is happy to settle for. And as long as the American president remains in this conflict, which from the speech he is, I think they'll be satisfied.
Sally, how are the Gulf states interpreting this speech?
Well, I think there was very little said in Donald Trump's speech that could offer any reassurance to Gulf states this morning. Certainly it felt like a lot more of the same. And I got to listen to the whole thing because I was woken by an emergency alert at 4:30 here for incoming missiles, the second one of the night, which perhaps is a good example of the disconnect between Donald Trump's messaging and the reality of these daily attacks that we continue to see here on the ground. And the thing that I was looking out for and listening out for in that speech was Donald Trump ruling out escalation, and that didn't happen. He said they were going to continue to hit Iran hard for the next 2 to 3 weeks, and he renewed that threat that if Iran doesn't do a deal, then they will strike energy infrastructure in Iran, something that could constitute a war crime, and something that Iran has said, if you do that, then we will retaliate and we will attack critical energy infrastructure in the region, even potentially desalination plants, which Gulf states are hugely reliant on for drinking water. What Donald Trump didn't detail and didn't renew was this deadline that he'd given Iran before, of the 6th of April at 8 p.m. Eastern time, which is Tuesday morning here in the UAE and in the UK. And that was the deadline he gave them when it came to this ultimatum of reopening the Strait of Hormuz or doing some sort of deal or inflicting these attacks on their energy infrastructure. We don't know if he's sticking to that timeline, but it certainly feels like the threat is still there and that those Marines and paratroopers that he's moved to the region in the last week or so could potentially be used in this next phase of the war, which would potentially be much more dangerous, not just for American troops, but also for civilians in the region if domestic infrastructure is indeed targeted by Iran. So none of this is good news for Gulf states. And if potentially Donald Trump decides to call a conclusion to the war as he sees it without reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which has become the defining issue for him when it comes to this war, it's been rather humiliating for him. He has not been able to solve this issue. If that happens, then it's still going to be hugely problematic and worrying for Gulf states because their economies are so reliant on the Strait of Hormuz as this choke point for exporting so much of their oil and gas. Now, an interesting story in the Financial Times today is talking about how officials here in the Gulf and oil executives are talking about using alternative pipelines to bypass the Strait of Hormuz and export oil that way. Well, that's all very well if you're the UAE and Saudi. You have not bad options, but terrible news if you're Qatar, who is hugely reliant on the Strait of Hormuz as their only export route for their liquefied natural gas, which has ceased to flow during this war. And that is something that is felt immediately around the world. So right now, as things stand following that speech, nothing has changed here. If anything, escalation feels more likely. If you look at the markets since Donald Trump made that statement, that address to the nation, oil prices are up since that speech, which suggests the market is now banking on escalation.
Sally, great stuff. Thanks so much for that live from Dubai. Well, Sally, just raising the market. So let's have a look how they have reacted this morning. And as we've been alluding to, they are interpreting President Trump's speech as not being a very clear commitment to ending this war soon, which had started to be the interpretation over the last couple of days, not least because he was making an address live from the White House and how that was the first time he's doing that during the course of this war. So here is a chart of oil prices since just before the start of the war. So you can see where we began at the end of February, down in the sort of $60 a barrel level. Well, this morning we're at 108, 107, and up a further 7% overnight off the back of that speech. So that's the size of the reaction to his speech. So we saw that really big fall earlier in the week when he was alluding to suggesting we might be finding an end to this war and announcing that he was going to do a speech from the White House, and we've unwound about half of that to be back to about 107. And you get quite a good snapshot of these moments over the course of this war where markets start to hope that we're going to have an off-ramp, and then that hope slips away quite quickly. This was just at the start of the war, and then he commented that it should only be a couple of weeks, and clearly that hasn't proven to be the case. This was that post on Truth Social 2 Mondays ago, nearly 2 weeks ago now, where he said peace talks have begun. And then again, we ramped up, got to as high as 118 earlier this week. That's the peak so far in the last couple of days. And again, prospects of an address from the Oval Office, from the White House, brought us back down to just briefly below 100 and then back up again, as I said, 7% to 108 this morning. What's this done to equity markets, to stocks and shares? Well, selling off the back of that. If we have a look at the next chart, please, guys. In Asia, the Japanese Nikkei was down 2.5% today. South Korea is down 5%. We mentioned yesterday how in the month of March as a whole, Korea was down 15%. Yesterday, ahead of that speech, it bounced half of that level, 8%, and it's now fallen again about 5%. And you're seeing smaller moves in US futures. They're not open yet, down about 1.4%. The FTSE 100 has opened down, but less than 1%. Let's look at borrowing costs, because this is really the eye of the storm for the UK itself. This is the one-year gilt yield. It started the war 3.5. Bank of England base rate, remember, is 3.75%. So at that point, people thought we might get a cut. It rallied the whole way up to 4.5. So suddenly people expecting that we might have 3 rate hikes. And then in the course of the last week, it's eased a bit, come down to about 4.3%. And this morning, it's hardly flinched. So you've got a little bit worse news, 4.3 still essentially the level. But the bottom line of this is even when you had that real high hope 24 hours ago that we might get an end, we only improved marginally. And this is really where we stand. 4.2, 4.3% having started the war at 3.5. And it's starting to show on those borrowing costs that sort of the after effects of this war, the problems of this war, are really baked into the UK economy. Even when you have good days, bad days, it doesn't really flinch that chart that much.
Yeah, so interesting. So the market's having their verdict. I mean, the other audience for Donald Trump is the American public as well. The polls just ahead of him starting to speak last night were not good for the president. Approval of the decision to go to war has dropped by about 7% since the beginning of the war and just before his speech. So whether or not it'll have convinced people or not, we'll wait and see, and those polls will be tested again.
Yeah, I mean, so it was an 18-minute address that the president gave last night, and of course a huge amount of it was about what he didn't say and didn't make that clear commitment to end things anytime soon. I thought, and I was surprised how much of it was almost his attempted justification of action so far, but possibly action to come. There was so much about the history of Iran, the fall of the Shah, why the regime was unfavoured and had killed lots of people, domestic and abroad. And again, it really sounded to me like an attempt to improve on the polls, but not by ending things, but trying to justify things and give him that extra cover for a few more weeks of this.
Yeah, and his argument as well about oil was, we produce plenty, we're the biggest producers in the world, we don't need to worry about the Hormuz Strait, so we can leave that to other people to sort out. But of course the price is dictated by international markets, so Americans' petrol prices will still go up, so that will have an impact on how they feel about it, no doubt.
Certainly will, certainly affecting, of course, people here. And we're going to talk about now a little bit more the impact on businesses here domestically, not just, of course, from the war in Iran, but also from some of the changes that we've seen in tax rules, of course, as we've seen some of the effects of the budget come in.
Yeah, sole traders and landlords apparently are feeling a bit confused, some of them, a bit unprepared, because the government's introduced new making tax digital plans. So let's find out a little bit more about it and what makes it so complex. Joining us now is broadcaster and consumer champion Dominic Littlewood. Very good morning to you. Nice to see you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, so explain to us exactly what the changes are. So sole traders and some landlords have got to fill in their tax assessments more often. Is that what it is, or differently?
Yeah, the criteria is, if you qualify, you have to be earning more than 50,000 gross, and that can be combined across the two industries, being a landlord or a sole trader. Second that happens, how you pay your tax is changing, not the amount you're paying. Instead of submitting everything in January once a year, you now have to submit it every quarter. And you've got no choice in it. If you're earning more than 50,000 gross, you have to do it. Now, most people think tax is a nightmare. 70% of people said they worry about it, and I think 16% of people that we surveyed said they actually have nightmares about it. There's a really, really easy solution. Download a software, an accounting software, like something like Free Agent, which is the one which I work for now. They will take care of everything for you as far as making tax digitally compliant with HMRC. A lot of people think that the new system means you've got to pay tax every quarter. You haven't. It's still only once a year at the end of your self-assessment in January. It's not scary.
But we now have to file every quarter?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Do you know that?
But that's if you're earning more than 50,000 and you're a sole trader.
Oh, if you're a sole trader, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
or an accountant. If you're not any of those, then it's not kicking in for that. But bear this in mind, because it's 50,000 this year. Next year it goes down to 30, and the following year it goes down to 20. So you really do need to get the software in place so that you are digitally compliant now.
What are the other tax rule changes that have just come in the 1st of April or will come in as we cross the tax year that people need to be aware of?
Well, I'm not a tax expert. I'm just here to tell you about the Make Tax Digital, what's happening there. That's happening on Monday, on the 6th of April. That's coming in, and if you're in that criteria there, where you're earning more than 50,000, sole trader or accountant, download your Free Agent software. You need it to be able to make sure that everything is clickety-boo.
And this is all about making businesses more, encouraging them to go digital, isn't it? I mean, is that for their own efficiency? Is that for the government's efficiency? Is that for the government saving money doing it digitally?
The way people do it at the moment is they put all their receipts in a glove box or a shoe box. I was just talking to your makeup ladies there. They do exactly the same as that. And then every January, everybody gets them out and half of your receipts are faded or ripped or you spilt coffee on them, etc. When you do it digitally every quarter, when you put the app, you literally take a photograph of the receipt, it categorises it for you. So it might be petrol, it might be food, restaurant, entertaining, whatever. It categorises it for you. At the end of the quarter, if you're happy, you submit it and it goes online. Then in January, when you do your self-assessment, you've had 4 lots of quarterlies already gone in. So it's actually it could save you a lot of money if you think about it. You're not going to lose receipts, everything's stored digitally, job's done. It's not a bad system, actually. It scares people, but it's nothing to be scared of.
Dominic, can we broaden out and ask a question about how consumers are feeling with the war going on and price pressures coming forward?
Well, I can tell you what I certainly feel with the war going on. I mean, if you're looking at it from making money, buy stocks and shares right now, because at the moment they plummeted. But generally speaking, most people are very panicked. House sales are down. I'm looking at, online at different things. House sales are online. People are panicking about petrol, food, heating. The whole of the country really is a little bit worried about things, aren't they?
Mm. But the digital side of it, you say don't panic about it. And I guess accountants and bookkeepers will be well appraised of all of this, won't they? So that if you do use an accountant, they're likely to know exactly what to do.
And it's a bit like back in 2000 when we had mobile phones that were analogue and they started to switch to digital and people said, I don't want anyone knowing it's my name coming up on the phone when we go digital. It happens. We can't stop it. It's happening. It's moving. It's the first thing the tax office have done with income tax in the last nearly 30 years. They're modernising it. They're digitalising it. Can't avoid it. It's happening. If you hit that criteria, and don't forget, because that's going down over the next 2 years, everybody who's a sole trader or a landlord will fit into that category at some point. Don't be scared of it. It's happening. Just get on board now. Get the software. Make sure that you're happy. You know what you're doing. Get ready with it, and it actually can be a lot easier, Anna.
Are there fines though if you don't get up to speed quickly enough?
That's an interesting question, and I get asked that a lot. Yes and no. There's no fines. This year, they're going to allow everybody to get used to it. But starting next year, there's a penalty point system in place. So if you're late with your tax or you get it wrong, you will get 1 penalty point. When you hit 3 or 4 penalty points, or your fourth, I should say, you get 3. So 3 strikes you out. The fourth one, you get a £200 fine. And then everyone after that, you get another £200 fine. So the 5th, 6th, 7th, etc. If you do everything good and you get no penalty points in 2 years, they wipe the slate clean. So you get 3 reminders, basically. Don't get it wrong, don't get it wrong, don't get it wrong. You've got it wrong, £200 fine.
Okay. Dominic, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dominic. Thank you.
Let's have a look at the weather now.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
Well, it's going to be fairly settled for most today, but it's going to turn wet and very windy over the Easter weekend. It's mostly fine now, although frosty in the north, and the west of Ireland has cloud and a few drizzly outbreaks moving in. Eastern British coasts have a few showers too. The rest of the morning looks dry and sunny for many, but Ireland and Northern Ireland will turn rather dull and damp. The Hebrides can expect some heavier rain, and it'll be cooler than recently. Western Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland will turn wet later with some transient snow over the highlands, and the wind will strengthen in the west, and expect very little change otherwise.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
6 teenage girls have been arrested after disorder on the streets of Clapham earlier this week.
Yeah, over 100 officers were called to Clapham High Street on Tuesday after reports that young people were looting shops and restaurants.
It's part of a pattern seen across England and Wales where shoplifting levels remain at record highs. Joining us is Andrew Goodacre. He's the Chief Executive of the British Independent Retailers Association. Andrew, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. How bad was the situation for retailers in Clapham this week?
Well, it's pretty horrible, you know, when you have that kind of mass event and people coming in with no fear, no tolerance, and simply looting and causing mayhem. Shop staff are scared, customers are scared, and it's a horrible, horrible situation for anyone to deal with.
Presumably this is a pretty rare occurrence. I mean, we did see riots some years ago when shops were broken into, but can we reassure ourselves that this doesn't happen very often?
We hope so, and it seems like it's organised, probably a social media event. We were warned a few weeks ago, the retail sector was warned about events like this that could take place, a take-back action type of event where people are targeting stores like Marks and Spencer's and large chains. So we hope it's maintained, controlled, and people are not going to do this in the future. But it seems to be a variation of a crime we've had to deal with now for 2 or 3 years. You know, retail theft, antisocial behaviour, abuse of retail staff are still at record highs. We're making progress. Police are responding better. We're seeing more arrests. But generally speaking, it's still a problem we're having to deal with.
Gauge for us that record highs. How bad has it been?
2 big surveys across the sector, including large chains and smaller shops, indicate that there's like 500,000 reported crimes, but 5 million crimes actually taking place of theft and abuse of staff in shops. Now, that's a record high. It's levelled off. It may be even slightly declining, which is fantastic, because for 3 years now, we've worked closely with the police and relevant authorities to make a difference to this and reduce it. The retail sector has invested £5 billion in extra security, CCTV, cabinets that you have to sort of be identified to enter, and so on. So there's been a huge investment on both sides, and hopefully we'll see this crime decline. But you know, it's a massive impact when we don't need it. You know, we're worried about the cost of prices. Well, retail theft is an inflationary factor.
Yeah, I mean, what's this like for shop owners and shop staff to be experiencing this sort of level of theft in their stores?
Retail should be working in a shop should be a fun place to work. People like to work in the shop. They like to deal with people. They like to serve people, and yet they face this daily abuse, threats for not serving people, simply enforcing the law in terms of underage drinking or whatever the case may be. Shop owners are, individuals own their businesses. They're losing their living. They're losing their profits. They're losing the will to carry on, and it's really damaging out there. Now, we are seeing improvements. The police have responded well, and that continues. But it's still a very hard life in the retail world.
Andrew, let's switch focus to talk about the impact of the war on retailers. Is it something that you're feeling the sort of impact of already, or just worried that if things persist, then you'll start to feel the impact of it?
Well, we are very worried. The whole sector's worried. The fear is, and the expectation is, that prices will rise because the supply chain prices will rise, and the cost of input to create goods will rise. So we're already seeing some of the supply chain indicating that rise is to be expected, and that will be passed down the line and regrettably passed on to consumers. So massive concern. What I would say is that the retail sector is robust. It has learned from what happened with Russia invading Ukraine. So there's a degree of learning, and we have to remember what we did then. And I think the retail sector will do its best to maintain A, supplies, and B, a cost that will not rise too high for the consumer.
I noticed that the Prime Minister brought in, alongside the Chancellor, supermarket bosses, for example, this week, a series of meetings to try to build up contingency plans to deal with the effects of the war. I mean, how much can the bigger shops do? I mean, how much leeway do they have to take some of the hit themselves and not pass it on to consumers? Or, I mean, how much grace is there in the system?
It's a good question. I mean, in terms of food retailing, the margins are low. You know, we are not talking about you're talking about high volume, very high volume in the case of the large chains, but low margins. So that doesn't leave a lot of leeway. I think there are things that will look for efficiencies. They'll look for trying to find ways of maybe alternative sources for product. But ultimately, it's very difficult to control prices and keep them low when all the pressures are coming through and the margins are low to begin with. So everything will be done to maintain the cost of living at a level, because no one wants inflation. Retailers don't want inflation any more than consumers do, because it's not good for business. So we really, every effort will be made.
Andrew, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Andrew Goodacre from the British Independent Retailers. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Big Sky News journalist. Ed Conway. Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Ridge and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
Now, Scott Mills has broken his silence after being sacked by the BBC.
The radio DJ had his contract terminated last Friday following an allegation relating to his personal conduct, and he's now released a statement. Graham's with us with a bit more of the detail of it. Morning, Graham.
Morning. This is the first we've heard from the 53-year-old since those allegations emerged publicly last week, the beginning of this week. A reminder of what they are, they relate to a police investigation in 2016 into serious sex offences which involve a teenage boy under 16, dating back to between 1997 and 2000. And I'm going to read you that statement out in full because I think it's quite important. It's been released via his lawyers. He said, "The recent announcement that I'm no longer contracted to the BBC has led to the publication of rumour and speculation. In response to this, the Metropolitan Police has made a statement which I confirm relates to me. An allegation was made against me in 2016 of a historic sexual offence which was the subject of a police investigation in which I fully cooperated and responded to in 2018. As the police have stated, a file of evidence was submitted to the Crown Prosecution Service, which determined that the evidential threshold had not been met to bring charges. Since the investigation related to an allegation that dates back nearly 30 years and the police investigation was closed 7 years ago, I hope that the public and the media will understand and respect my wish not to make any further public comment on this matter." He then said, "I wish to thank from the bottom of my heart all those who have reached out to me with kindness, my former colleagues and my beloved listeners who I greatly miss." Now, the BBC itself has confirmed that it knew about the investigation back in 2017, but they said now it decided to act decisively after receiving new information in the weeks before his sacking. It also said more work was ongoing there to understand exactly the detail of what the corporation knew back in 2017.
And, of course, all this happens at a time of change at the top at the BBC.
Yeah, absolutely. It happens that today is the former, soon-to-be former, Director General's last day. Tim Davie, his last day was organised way before any of this broke, but in his time in charge, there have been a number of controversy. Obviously, probably most well-known is 2024, Hugh Edwards pleading guilty to having indecent images of children. More recently, a $10 billion lawsuit from President Donald Trump about potential disingenuous editing of a speech before the Capitol riots in 2021. In this case, despite Scott Mills obviously saying, let me have some privacy, I won't be making any more public comment at this time, because of his status, celebrity status, essentially, there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable questions being asked for not just him, but the BBC as well.
Graham,
stuff. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now then, I think we're talking about Iran once again. We're returning to, obviously, we've got two big stories today, the launch of Artemis II, but also the speech that Donald Trump made last night, late last night, our time, about 2 a.m, about the war in Iran. That's one of the issues that we're going to pick up, actually, with the Liberal Democrats. I think that's what we're doing next. It is. We're talking to Daisy Cooper, who's Deputy Liberal Democrat
leader. By the way,
leader.
Anna seamlessly handled chaos there, if you were trying to pick up on that.
You don't need to tell them that. Daisy Cooper, very good morning to you. Thanks for talking to us. So, Donald Trump addressing the nation last night, saying that the US's, as he described it, little journey to Iran was a success and was nearing completion. However, he did reiterate his call for other nations to sort out the Hormuz Strait. I wonder what your reaction is to that and what the UK should be doing to try to get the strait open.
Well, it looks like Donald Trump is going to pursue further escalation in the coming weeks, and I think it is incredibly dangerous and it's incredibly reckless of him to do so. It was clear from the get-go that Donald Trump had absolutely no idea what his final strategic objective was. He couldn't outline that. Different members of his administration were saying different things. Clearly, it is important that we can get the strait reopened so that we can end the conflict and make sure we can then drive down energy prices and food prices as well. But quite frankly, Donald Trump is not helping. And it's just another sore reminder that he is unreliable and pretty reckless, quite frankly.
Your leader, Ed Davey, has expressed concern about the King's visit to the US at the end of the month to see Donald Trump, with the president saying that the war is nearly over. Does that ease your mind at all?
No, not remotely. I think it is a total humiliation that the king is effectively being sent there. I think it's a humiliation for him and a humiliation for our country. Donald Trump has said appalling things about the service and sacrifice of British personnel during previous wars. He has ridiculed our Royal Navy. He's inflicted, these illegal attacks on Iran that has been hitting ordinary British people in the pocket through a rising cost of living. And the idea that we're going to somehow reward that behaviour by giving him the one thing that he wants, the honour of hosting our king, I think is pretty outrageous.
Clearly, prices are rising already at the pump, yet to see that for energy bills because of the energy price cap. Does that suggest we need to bide our time before deciding how or if consumers should be helped with their finances?
Well, some bills are going up now. For example, households who rely on oil have seen, many of them have reported their bills have already doubled. And that's why we've called on the government to look at something like a price cap mechanism for household oil. But there's no doubt that people are already experiencing increases. People are incredibly nervous. And I worry that the government, by saying they're not going to do anything until the autumn, my fear is that the mood music is suggesting to people that the government is going to do too little, too late, and for too few people. If people do not feel reassured that help is going to come, that the cavalry is coming at some point soon, then they're going to hold back. They won't have confidence in spending any money, and we could inadvertently trigger a recession. So I think the government needs to be really clear about who they will be supporting at the very least. And with rumours that energy bills could go up by, perhaps up to £500 per household, I mean, that's a pretty scary prospect for huge numbers of people. So the government needs to be clear about what kind of things it's considering and who it might help under which circumstances.
With respect, Daisy Cooper, do you need to be clear about how you would pay for what you're kind of loosely alluding to? I mean, obviously you're not suggesting specific measures either, but we've seen our borrowing costs in this country rise much more than other countries, in part because of this sense that the government will always step in and pay for things. How would you pay for any extra consumer help that you'd provide?
Well, before the budget last year, we Liberal Democrats called on the government to consider raising a windfall tax on the unexpected profits of the big banks. That was a proposal that was brought forward by the independent think tank, the IPPR, which we backed, and that could raise up to £30 billion over the next 5 years. At the moment, we know that because fuel prices are going up because of the war, America's attacks on Iran, the government is receiving £20 million extra, £20 billion extra, £20 million extra a day through increased VAT and other tax receipts. And that is money that could be spent on giving support to struggling households. So there are sources of revenue if the government wants to go after them. But fundamentally, the government has got to grow the economy. That's the one thing that's going to turn our economy around. And right now, when, as you say, whether it's debt, whether it's taxes, whether it's anything else, all of the red lights on the economic board are flashing red. And there's one big lever the government could pull to boost economic growth, and that is a better trading relationship with Europe. And it is so frustrating that after 20 months of this government, they're still talking about getting a better trading relationship with Europe. They're just not getting on and delivering it.
Of course, that would take time, and we are where we are with immediate reaction. Just going back to what you just said there, I mean, do you, yes, VAT on fuel sales will go up because of the increase in fuel prices, but do you accept that the net effect of this war in the Middle East will be reducing government finances? There will be less for them to spend, not more.
But the government has got to go for growth. At the moment, and say for 20 months...
So forgive me then, extra taxes or extra spending from what's coming up surely won't help that.
So the extra revenue that the government is going to bring in VAT and other tax receipts as a result of this conflict in the Middle East could be used to ease the cost of living pressures that families are already facing.
But do you accept that that will be a smaller increase than the net effect on government finances from this war? They will be losing revenue, all sorts of net negative economic effects of this war, as opposed to gaining revenue in total.
But there is no doubt that this conflict is going to have a number of effects on our economy. We're yet to see what all those effects are. What we have said very clearly is the government should be seeking to grow the economy with a better deal with Europe. They could be looking for fairer ways of raising taxes from big banks, raising billions of pounds for the exchequer, and they could be using some of these new receipts as well. We've set out time and time again ways in which the government could raise revenue in a fair way, whilst at the same time giving them ideas on how they could tackle the cost of living. Everything from taking energy levies off people's household bills, to a VAT cut to boost economic growth on our high streets, to reversing the fuel duty increase that is expected in September. So we've given idea after idea after idea about how to help households, and we've given ideas on how the government could raise revenue fairly and manage the economy at the same time.
Well, Daisy Cooper, we are out of time, but we appreciate you joining us this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Lots more to come. After the break, we'll have all of the day's top stories. Of course, that includes the latest from the Artemis II launch overnight and the reaction to President Trump's overnight address from the White House. And coming up...
Yeah, we've got a special programme for you on the Artemis launch. Join us at 9:30. We've got all sorts of experts, including we're going to hear from Helen Sharman once again, Britain's first astronaut, who has a unique insight into this extraordinary launch, having sat in a similar capsule herself.
Join us at 9:30, but stay with us until then as well.
Yeah,
we'll
absolutely.
Be right back
Join us at
after
9
this
too.
Short break.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Jones and Frost.
With Anna and Wilf. Good morning from me as well. Lots around today.
Booster ignition and liftoff.
NASA launches its first crewed mission around the moon in more than 50 years.
The Artemis crew are on the first part of their 10-day mission and will be orbiting Earth before heading to the moon.
Also today, we'll bring you a space special with all the highlights from last night's mission. That's at 9:30.
Also, Donald Trump claims his core objectives in Iran are nearly complete, but his speech rattles the markets, with oil prices once again on the rise. Hello, a very good morning. Thanks for joining us. So, two huge stories will dominate our programme today: war and space.
Today's agenda, of course, encapsulates a triumph of human endeavour going into space against a backdrop of turmoil and conflict here on Earth.
So, a successful launch of the Artemis II, the first crewed mission to the moon in over 50 years. The crew saying we're going for all humanity. Also, the Iran war. Is there an end in sight? President Trump says his core objectives are near completion, after pledging the US would leave the country in 2 to 3 weeks. But his address has failed to reassure markets. Oil prices once again rising sharply, about 8% higher to $107 a barrel this morning. Well, lots more on the latest developments in the Middle East in our programme, but let's start with some good, in fact, inspirational news. That successful launch for Artemis II, paving the way for future missions to even land on the moon. Well, here's our science correspondent Thomas Moore from Florida.
4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff. The crew of Artemis II now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
NASA's most powerful ever rocket rose from Launch Pad 39B on a fiery tail. Its first flight with a crew on board, 4 astronauts having the ride of their lives.
On, pumps fully on.
5 hours earlier, they were zipped into their survival suits. Victor Glover, Christina Cook, Canadian Jeremy Hansen, and their commander Reed Wiseman. They emerged from the building where they'd been quarantined in the run-up to launch, cheered by their families. A last chance for goodbyes, 4 humans leaving behind their earthly ties as they began their epic journey. They were greeted at the launch tower by the team that would strap them into the Orion capsule, no bigger than a camper van, and their home for the next 10 days.
For the entire crew, com check on Orion to Earth 1.
Then, with 10 minutes on the clock, the launch director, the first woman in charge of a moonshot, rallied the crew.
On this historic mission, you take with you the heart of this Artemis team, the daring spirit of the American people and our partners across the globe, and the hopes and dreams of a new generation. Good luck. Godspeed, Artemis II. Let's go.
10, 9, 8.
Then liftoff.
25 engines lit.
8 million pounds of thrust pushing the mammoth rocket skywards.
I can feel the rumble coming across the water there. Extraordinary sound. The vibrations in my chest. That bright light, the fiery trail. It's crackling. That is the most extraordinary sound. The crackle as the rocket powers off the ground. You can feel it in your chest. And the bright light, it's almost like the sun.
Technical problems forced the cancellation of launch plans earlier this year, but this was textbook. 8 minutes later, the main engines cut out, and they were in space. But the NASA chief can't relax yet.
What were your feelings watching your crew rising above Pad 39B? And do you feel that extra sense of responsibility for the crew as they head further into space?
It is far less stressful to be strapped into the rocket than to be responsible for it here on Earth. So I definitely had those feelings quite a bit. But, you know, you derive a lot of confidence from the process that leads up to this moment.
2 German astronauts had added interest in the launch.
Just seeing this rocket light up and then being 6 kilometers away, right? Sound takes almost 20 seconds until it arrives, and then when it's there, it just hits you like a sledgehammer. It rattles, it shakes you.
One of them will get the first European seat on a future mission, perhaps landing on the moon.
I'm just loving the smiles on your faces. So you really wanted to be on board, right?
Definitely. It's like it's a perfect adventure, and it's the beginning of a new era. I think most people don't realize, like, from today on, like, mankind will return to the moon.
The crew are on a 700,000-mile test flight to loop around the moon, already in an orbit far higher than the International Space Station. A chance to soak up the experience before heading into deep space later today.
It was an amazing ride uphill. The views, we've got 2 moon rises that we've had so far, and the views of planet Earth, we've circled it completely, and we forgot how beautiful it is to look down on Earth.
The mission has already made history. For the first time, a woman, a person of colour, and a non-American has left low Earth orbit. NASA is going back to the moon, this time far more representative of all humanity. Thomas Moore, Sky News, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Well, Sky Science and Technology editor Tom Clark is with us. Hello to you, Tom. But first, let's turn to British astronaut Helen Sharman, who's been with us through the morning. Hi there, Helen.
Hi.
So, talk us through how exciting a moment this is as far as space exploration is concerned, and what's it like being an astronaut watching 4 other astronauts blast into space?
Well, just going so far away from the Earth has to be such not just exhilarating for the astronauts, but of course all the technology, the life support systems that they're testing. So they're testing a whole new spacecraft, which has got to be pretty amazing to do anyway. But yes, but being able as an astronaut to look back on the Earth. So from low Earth orbit, where I was, I could see large sections of the Earth at a time, but not the whole globe. But now in high Earth orbit, where they've already got to, they'll be able to look and see the Earth as one globe. In fact, NASA says it's the equivalent of holding a basketball at arm's length. That's how big the Earth will appear to them now, and it's going to get smaller when they get further away.
God,
fantastic!
That's amazing.
Yeah, that is great.
Tom, what are the main things that's the aims of this that they're trying to achieve?
I mean, I think the first thing you'll remember this, although they are going further than humans have been for 54 years, you know, it's as Helen was saying, that itself is remarkable. It's a journey of exploration, but the main purpose of this is test flight. They are testing this hardware, they're testing the systems on board, they're testing the astronauts as well. So it's checking through all those systems, checking the astronauts' health. They're doing studies on the radiation exposure they're going to have out there. So that they're looking at all of those elements because they are laying the foundations for a sustained campaign. And the NASA administrator said, ultimately they want to be landing 2 crews a year on the moon going into the 2030s as they start constructing a lunar base. So they want to demonstrate that all these bits of hardware check out. So it is a test flight. And ultimately, as we heard the NASA administrator, who's been to space himself, saying, his ultimate test of success is the parachutes opening and then safely splashing down in the Pacific Ocean in about 9 days' time now. So that's what they're doing. But it's a test flight. It's looking at everything, not just on the spacecraft, but on the ground. We were just hearing how they're inspecting the launch tower to make sure how much damage it's sustained. How can they keep this level of cadence? There's thousands of people working on this very complex mission objective.
So a very complex road test, essentially, with the ultimate aim to land astronauts on the moon and perhaps set up some kind of base. But are they in competition here? Is there a bit of a space race going on?
This is why it's really become rather urgent, I think, and why NASA and other organisations have diverted resources into this establishment of a moon base operation. The other countries have stated interests in the moon. There's a huge lunar economy to be grabbed, and in particular, it's China. China has been doing this and has stated for many years that it wants to put astronauts and sustained operations in particular on the lunar surface. If China gets the best bit of the South Pole, beautifully strategic part of the moon, if China gets that first, maybe NASA won't be able to have what they want from that particular part of the moon, and then the rest of the moon might be more difficult to explore. So yeah, it is competition.
Why is that part so strategic?
Fantastic. It's got a crater, a really deep crater, and we know that there's water ice, but it's water there, water which astronauts can drink. You can electrolyse it to create oxygen to breathe, rocket fuel as well. The lip of that crater has sunlight pretty much all the time, so you can charge all of your electronics. You can have good communications to the Earth, and inside that crater some great minerals. So we can do science, extract resources, and really use it to explore the rest of the moon possibly as well.
And give us an idea of what they might be doing now.
So right now they're asleep after a very busy day yesterday, and you saw them sitting on top of that rocket for hours waiting to go, and then there was I'd love to know, how rough a ride is it? That's what I want to know. I mean, that launch, it's...
With the solid rocket boosters, I think that would be a bit of vibration, and then once they're gone, it's a little smoother.
Right, so they've had a rough ride, and then immediately they had to do these proximity testing manoeuvres, so they were busy all through the night. They're having some sleep now. Next big step, other than testing some life support things that I've just been listening into, is the lunar injection burn, so the burn of the engines of the European service module that's going to send them off on their way to the moon. But they're not going to do that until they're 100% sure everything is working perfectly.
OK, fantastic. Tom and Helen, thanks very much indeed. We're going to hear much more from both of you shortly, because we've got a special programme on the Artemis launch on Sky News here at 9:30.
To the war in Iran now, and Donald Trump has declared American forces will finish the job in Iran very shortly, saying the US's core objectives are nearing completion.
So he made the comments during a 20-minute televised address from the White House, delivered directly to the American people, and warned that the US would begin targeting Iran's energy infrastructure unless a deal is done to open the crucial Strait of Hormuz.
I've made clear from the beginning of Operation Epic Fury that we will continue until our objectives are fully achieved. Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Our International Affairs Editor, Dominic Waghorn, is here with us. Dom, your interpretation of what that speech means?
Well, I think it's worrying. I think the bottom line is that the president doesn't have a grasp of the balance of power in this conflict this number of weeks in. And what I mean by that is the Iranians have gone from producing and controlling around 4 to 5% of the world's oil to now controlling a fifth of it because of their grip on the Strait of Hormuz, quite apart from the control they have over the flow of fertiliser, of gas and everything else that the Persian Gulf produces. Now, that gives them a kind of death grip that they can squeeze whenever they want, that is going to affect all of our lives economically, but also the political fortunes of Donald Trump himself. And despite the sort of political peril that's put him into, he doesn't have a solution to that, apart from sort of empty rhetoric and bluster. His prescription for it is a sort of a certain combination of sort of threat and wishful thinking. So he's saying that the Iranians are desperate to do a deal, and it's going to be up to him when he decides what that deal is going to be. And when it happens, you know, from our soundings in Tehran, they certainly don't seem desperate for a deal. Quite the opposite. In fact, they believe that they've been burnt 3 times now by an American president who pulled America out of the JCPOA, and then used diplomacy as sort of cover under which or over which he then launched attacks on Iran. So they're not sort of desperate to go back into diplomacy with the Americans, particularly when they will believe that the balance of power in this conflict is in their favour. And the other kind of lever he wanted to threaten to use is bombing Iran again and again. And the problem with that is, you know, from our soundings in Tehran, again, having been there recently, is that the Iranian government regards it a duty of its people to sacrifice themselves. It draws on that kind of Iranian cultural tradition of resistance and no surrender, to expect that from its people. And it's not prepared, I think, to trade the leverage it's now found in this war over the Strait of Hormuz, really to keep the lights on in Iran. So Donald Trump doesn't have a solution to this problem, which is a fundamental problem for him politically, militarily as well, but also for all of us and for the global economy.
Well, yeah, so where does this leave the Strait of Hormuz? Because if Donald Trump doesn't manage to get a deal from the Iranians, if they do continue to manufacture weapons that they can fire at their neighbours, what's the solution? Is there a scenario where they just charge people to use it, or could attacks just continue ad infinitum?
Yeah, I think that's the danger, is if they've already sort of turned the Strait of Hormuz into a kind of toll booth, so they're charging tankers $2 million to pass through the strait. And if he walks away from this now, they're going to retain that ability, which is a problem for his allies in the region and for the global economy. The alternative is he goes in deeper and he sends troops in, but he doesn't have enough troops in the region yet to do that. It would be very, very dodgy, I think, and perilous for the American military to try and secure that route in a military sense, because it only takes the threat of a mine or a drone or a missile to hit a tanker to rack up insurance rates. That's the problem. It's not blocking it physically. It is making it economically impossible to get tankers through. So the only solution to that is diplomatic, and at the moment the Iranians seem to think that then they don't seem to be in the mood to do a deal. And from what we heard from the American president last night, he doesn't have a way out. He looks like he's desperate to find a way out. His heart doesn't seem to be in it, if you listen to the kind of tone of his speech, but he doesn't have a way to the exit yet.
Dom, great stuff as always. Thanks so much. Dominic Waghorn, International Affairs Editor, now joining us as our Economics and Data Editor, Ed Conway as well. And Ed, very good morning to you.
Morning.
We've been talking about the market reaction all morning to the speech and the fact that oil prices back up 7% to $108 a barrel. I mean, the other thing that I thought was so striking was, rather than thinking maybe there'll only be another week or two, it was almost like we'll have at least 2 or 3 more weeks. Forget what the prices are. What does that mean to our supplies if we have 2 or 3 more weeks of the Strait not being open?
Gosh, I mean, it's the short answer is not good at all. Essentially at the moment, there's this shortage of oil. There's a gap between the amount of oil that we kind of need as a global economy. And, ultimately, what does that mean in practice? I mean, that is, oil is your fuel to do things, whether it's flying, whether it's kind of obviously driving. Even now in 2026, we still need an awful lot of it. And, the longer this goes on, this is the thing, it's partly a question of that gap, but it's partly a question of just how long there is that gap. And the longer this goes on, the more empty the various kind of tanks around the world, whether it's kind of, storing diesel or storing jet fuel, will get, and the more painful this will become. So it is all about time. And that's why people are watching, Donald Trump and indeed other people, and trying to kind of gauge how long does he think this is going to go on for? Because if talking to Dom just now, I mean, if amazingly they are able to kind of reopen the Straits of Hormuz and then shipping can go pass through freely, then all of a sudden it's maybe not quite back to normal, because there'll be a bit of scarring for some time. But it's still, that would be fantastic news. But the longer this goes on for, it is going to get exponentially more painful for all of us. And so that's why this is such a kind of grisly, depressing period, because everyone was watching Donald Trump last night and, like I guess investors, hoping for some kind of hint that maybe it was going to be sooner rather than later. And I suspect part of the reason that oil prices are up, up, yes, share prices kind of down, it was a bad reaction. Part of that is because I think they were hoping that there was going to be more of a positive, prognosis about how long this was going to last.
So the market's clearly not happy about it, but what does it mean for the likes of you and me? What does it mean for individuals in this country?
Well, I mean, sugar the pill, it's not good. It's not good. It means that the longer this goes on, the higher petrol prices are likely to go, the higher diesel prices are likely to go. There are genuine question marks about how... I mean, it differs depending on the type of fuel. We as a nation actually have quite a lot of unleaded. We produce quite a lot in our refineries. We don't produce that much diesel. We produce very little jet fuel compared with what we need. So we're very exposed, and it kind of depends. It's back to this kind of boring stuff about refineries and where stuff actually comes from and where we process stuff, which is not very fashionable to think about. And the government hasn't spent much time thinking about it for years and years and years. But now it turns out here is the crisis when it actually kind of manifests. And unfortunately, the longer this goes on, the deeper the impact. But right now, the government doesn't want to talk about this. And so you've got this strange kind of paradox between, both of you talking to government ministers, they're saying, oh, no, carry on life as normal. And that's because they're terrified about what happened back in 2021, which was when there was an HGV, so lorry driver shortage. Briefly, everyone fretted and then went and kind of got lots of petrol. Do you remember that in 2021, that moment that everyone's kind of queuing up at petrol stations? That was demand. So it was almost like a bank run, people rushing to try and get petrol out as quickly as they could. The government is terrified about precipitating something like that happening again. But this time around, it's different. This time around, there is a genuine concern about the amount of supply that we have coming into this country, and we are dependent on overseas. I suspect they're just hoping to get through Easter, and then next week, things, you know, they'll maybe have a different tone. But we'll have to see.
Fantastic stories. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ed.
We're going to continue this discussion with the Tories after the break with the Shadow Energy Secretary, Claire Coutinho.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome, Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think is really unusual? Mornings with Richard and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
Time now to speak to the Conservatives. We're joined this morning by Shadow Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I wondered if I can get your reaction to Donald Trump's speech last night, where he addressed the nation to give the Americans an update on the war in Iran. He said that the US, he described it as the US's little journey. He said it was a success and was nearing completion, but he reiterated his calls for other nations to step in to open up the Straits of Hormuz. Where do you think that leaves the UK? And also, where does it leave the UK's relationship with the US?
Well, you know, I think Kemi Badenoch has been pretty clear about criticising some of the war of words that we've seen across the Atlantic. As she said, and I completely agree with her, that only people who are winning from that are our enemies who want to see the Western alliance fragment. But in terms of people spending more on defence, I agree with that. We've set out policies to increase our defence spending. The world is obviously getting more dangerous and we need to be able to look after our own interests abroad and protect our people here at home.
What would you do to try to open the Hormuz Strait, though?
So I don't have the sensitive military operation that information that government would have, but I can point to you some of the interventions we made when we were in government. For example, when the Houthis were attacking shipments shipping lanes in Yemen. We took targeted interventions to keep shipping lanes open, and I hope that's the kind of approach that government would take as well.
You talked about the war of words across the Atlantic. Keir Starmer yesterday talked about building closer relations with Europe. Does that make sense to you, given the slightly fractured relationship between the UK and the US?
Well, look, it depends what it means. One of the things that I look at is obviously energy and industrial policy, and one of the things that Keir Starmer has signed up to is closer energy policy with the EU. Even the EU admits that their energy policy is undermining their industrial competitiveness. So that's an area where I don't think we want closer cooperation. I think we want to be able to do our own thing, make sure our energy is cheaper and make sure our industry is protected. And one of the policies that we're setting out today is axing the carbon tax, which is killing off British industry. We are deindustrialising. We lost a third of our refineries last year. That means less petrol, less diesel, less jet fuel being made in Britain, all so that we can import more from abroad with higher emissions. That cannot make sense. We have to do our own thing here. We have to be able to protect British industry.
But carbon taxes are designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by making polluters pay. Isn't that something that a lot of people would sign up to?
So what's happening at the moment is decarbonisation is happening through deindustrialisation. When these carbon taxes were adopted, it was assumed that the rest of the world would follow suit, but you do not have the same punitive taxes in the Middle East, in China, in the US, and all you are seeing is British industry go under. Like I said, we lost a third of our refineries last year. We've lost 60% of our chemicals capacity in the last few years. And for what? So we can import more things from India and China, where they have much, much higher emissions. Let me give you an example. We had an ammonia plant in the UK that was the cleanest ammonia plant in Europe. We've lost that, and that means we get ammonia now from the rest of the world with lower environmental standards. That simply does not make sense. We have to protect our ability to make things in this country.
Let me go back to the geopolitical situation. Donald Trump didn't repeat his threats to pull out of NATO in his speech yesterday, but over the last few days he has on several occasions threatened just that. How seriously do you take that, and how worried should we be?
Well, look, I think, again, the only people who are winning from this are our enemies. There are a group of countries across the world, whether it's Russia, whether it's Iran, whether it's North Korea, whether it's China, that are hostile to the Western alliance. And I think, therefore, you have to protect the Western alliance. It's the thing that's kept us safe for the better half of a century. And does that mean we have to invest more in defence? I think it does across Europe, but we also know the world is getting more dangerous, so we're going to need to do that anyway. But ultimately, I think NATO is a good thing. I think the Western alliance is a good thing, and we need to be able to band together to protect the things that we believe in here in the West.
Yesterday on this programme, we saw the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, doing a national address to the nation in Australia, and he told the public not to use any more fuel than they need. Not the first leader to do that and give some guidelines around the use of fuel. What do you think of that? Do you think that people should moderate their behaviour? What's your view?
Well, look, when I was in government, I would have very detailed information around fuel supplies in the country. I don't get that as the opposition. But one of the things that we're highlighting today is that we are losing our ability to make our own petrol and diesel and jet fuel. And that, in a global supply shock situation, our third in sort of 5 years, is simply crazy. So we have to be able to make sure that our refineries can succeed. Some of our refineries now spend as much on the carbon tax as they do on their wage bill. That's simply crazy. We need to be able to make things in Britain, and that's why we've set out the policies we have today.
OK, well, Claire Coutinho, we appreciate your time. Thanks for coming in. Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have a special 30-minute programme on the historic Artemis II launch. Stay tuned. This is Mornings on Sky News. One enormous story this morning. NASA has successfully launched its long-awaited Artemis II mission to the moon.
Yes, 4 astronauts are now in space on the furthest journey from Earth that humans have ever attempted.
10, 9, 8, 7. RS-25 engines lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff. The crew of Artemis II now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
Good roll pitch. Roger, roll pitch.
Houston now controlling the flight of Integrity on the Artemis II mission around the moon.
Integrity, AMT high. AMT high.
On time passing 30 seconds into the flights. Integrity passes the alternate beacon. Target milestone. Mission Control Houston seeing good performance on the 4 main engines. Space Launch System core stage. Integrity, 3 miles in altitude. Traveling more than 1,200 miles per hour.
Well, the crew began their journey to the launch pad by greeting their families as they left the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building in Florida.
So the astronauts had been in quarantine there for the last fortnight, and that was to stop them getting ill. There was a lot of excitement from the crew and those around them as they said their goodbyes.
The crew then entered the spaceship, the Orion, the only part designed to return to Earth. They were strapped in by NASA technicians and then performed checks and readied themselves for the journey into space as the ground control team did their final checks.
And for all personnel, this is the NTD conducting the Artemis II launch readiness check. Verify ready to resume count and go for launch. OTC.
OTC is go.
STC.
STC is go.
GTC.
C's go.
MCO.
TO is go.
Safety console.
Safety console is go.
LPE. LPE's go. RTD.
RTD's go.
Houston flight.
Houston flight is go.
ROC.
ROC is go.
And CDR.
Crew is go.
Copy that. Thank you, Reed. And Launch Director NTD, our launch team is ready to proceed at this time.
10, 9, 8, 7. RS-25 engines lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff. The crew of Artemis II now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
And then they were
Good roll pitch.
After 8 minutes, they reached space,
Roger,
and they're
roll
now
pitch.
in orbit.
They'll remain there for 1 day. Let's take a listen to the 4 astronauts settling into their new home in space.
All right, Amy, welcome on board the Integrity spacecraft. We got, right now, myself and Christina are in seats 1 and 2, getting ready for rendezvous and proxops demonstration. Victor's just finishing up getting out of suits and getting suit drying going, and Jeremy is hard at work in cabin configuration. It was an amazing ride uphill. The views, we've got 2 moon rises that we've had so far, and the views of planet Earth. We've circled it completely, and we forgot how beautiful it is to look down on Earth.
Well, after the successful launch, NASA gave an update to the press about the rocket's progress.
NASA is back in the business of sending astronauts to the moon. We have arrived at this point through a sustained effort and national commitment and the work of thousands across the agency, our industry partners, and our international allies. We have certainly been here before. We know the challenges ahead. We have a lot of checkouts to get through before TLI. And when, if all goes well, everything is go, Artemis II will be moonbound. You have our commitment to keep the public as informed as possible on this historic mission. And we will celebrate when this crew, we will hold our celebration until this crew is under parachutes and splashes down off the west coast of the United States.
Let's tell you a little bit more about the Artemis II crew. 4 astronauts taking part in the 10-day mission around the moon.
Well, the mission's commander is 50-year-old Reed Wiseman, an engineer and US Navy veteran. He launched to the International Space Station in 2014. He spent 165 days in space.
He's joined by 49-year-old Victor Glover, the mission's pilot. He was the pilot on the first operational SpaceX crewed Dragon flight to the International Space Station. He's racked up 168 days in space and is the first African-American, indeed the first person of colour, to fly beyond low Earth orbit.
There are two crew specialists. One of them is 47-year-old Christina Cook. Once an explorer of the Arctic and Antarctic, she lived and worked on the ISS for 328 days. She's the first woman ever to travel beyond low Earth orbit.
The only non-American on the flight is 50-year-old mission specialist Jeremy Hansen. He's the first Canadian to venture to the moon and the only crew member to never have been to space before. Well, let's explore all of these moving parts in a bit more detail. We're delighted to say we're joined by Britain's first ever astronaut, Helen Sharman, who's with us this morning, and our science and technology editor, Tom Clark. Great to have you both with us. Helen, just to sum it up for us, I've seen that clip of the takeoff now multiple times this morning. I find it extraordinary watching it back every time. It must be particularly extraordinary for someone who's been there, done that.
I mean, this rocket is so much more powerful than any other human-rated rocket. So, yes, all of us astronauts can remember what it's like launching ourselves. And we have a similar G loads on our bodies, so 4G that's the kind of G that I experienced during launch, which is what the astronauts experienced in this SLS rocket. But they will have done that will have been sustained for a bit longer. And just the sheer power of those solid rocket boosters. So, yes, we saw the RS-25 engines, so these are all shuttle engines, actually, but we saw them igniting. They give you quite some thrust. But these solid rocket boosters, you saw that as soon as they ignite, boom, the rocket's off.
A really powerful moment in so many ways. And Tom, just tell us about the significance of this. It's the first time that NASA has sent astronauts to the moon since the 1970s.
That's right.
So how big a moment is it?
It's a huge deal. I mean, it is fair, and people are saying, well, haven't we done? We've done this before. You know, why spend tens of billions, probably hundreds of billions by the time they've delivered all the objectives of this thing, to do something and go somewhere we've been before? But I think it's important to say they're going differently. The idea now is to establish a sustained presence on the moon, establish a base there. This rocket is bigger and more powerful because it's carrying more loads than the Apollo missions did. And there's going to be a whole bunch of other hardware and habitation stuff they're building to establish that presence on the moon. So they're really going further and beyond. But it's significant too because it's not easy. You know, it wasn't easy back in the 60s. It doesn't make it, the physics of it don't get easier today, even though the technology is much improved. So just the sheer fact, I think Thomas really echoed this last night, of the fact we're going that far once again is something you can't not be completely awestruck by. I mean, the fact, and I think I'm right, Helen, I mean, they're at sort of 50,000 miles above the Earth. They're in a high Earth orbit now. I think they're already the furthest humans have been for 50 years in space anyway, because since the Apollo mission, since we were sending people off in the direction of the moon, all of our crewed spaceflight has been in low Earth orbit. Not that that's not a fantastic, wonderful thing to do at all, but they're already significantly further than that.
And obviously some very experienced astronauts, one who's never been to space. What's going through their mind at the moment? And this has been tested, this type of spacecraft, but not tested that extensively.
This is only the second ever flight of this particular rocket, this SLS, Space Launch System. There's been modifications made to the rocket, to the spacecraft as well, since it was first tested without crew. And of course, you can't test it properly anyway unless you've got people in it, because you can't test the life support systems. So, for instance, one of the many, many tests that they're doing on it, about this human spacecraft interface, is their life support system. They're breathing out carbon dioxide. So clearly we need to clean the air of carbon dioxide. We've got amine filters, which have been tried and tested on the International Space Station. That's great. They will absorb the carbon dioxide. We pretty much rely on that. But the difference this time is that they're venting that carbon dioxide out into space so they can recharge their amine filters, reuse them. But what sort of effect will that have on the trajectory of the rocket itself? So when they do their exercise, for instance, one of the things that they're going to be doing when they wake up after their second sleep today, they're going to be pulling on a flywheel. That will create vibrations. How will that affect not so much the trajectory of the spacecraft, but perhaps the big solar wings that are out there that could be quite floppy? So how will that affect them, and will it affect the rest of the structure? What about the other acceleration, the little tiny G-loads, different parts of the spacecraft? Huge amount, just because there are people in there, let alone it's a new spacecraft.
Fantastic, and which kind of brings us on to the bigger aims of this whole project. I mean, this is really kind of like a technical dry run, in a sense, isn't it? Testing out what they can and can't do with an ultimate aim of landing people, putting people on the moon.
It's a test flight. It's to see that this hardware works. You know, we're talking about them heading off to the moon. They're not even going to do that unless they're very, very happy that everything's working on that. There's a meeting later today at NASA to decide, are we happy with all the systems as they look before they make that commitment? Because obviously once they're headed off to the moon, they're not coming back for the duration of the 10-day mission. So another 8 days from when they make that choice, they've got to be really certain. So it's testing that hardware, ensuring that it works, and figuring out what lessons can we learn from this that will inform future missions. The factors that Helen was mentioning, the sorts of radiation exposures they're going to get, the sorts of wear and tear on the hardware, how often can we run these things, how can we repeat it? And then, yes, the ultimate goal is to, they use this term cadence, we hear a lot, the cadence of these missions has to increase a lot if they're going to deliver on this ultimate objective, which is establishing a lunar base on the South Pole. And there is now competition from other countries, China leading those, but India, Russia, others are also quite interested in the lunar environment and what we might find and develop there.
Tom, Helen, obviously stick with us. Let's bring in now Chris Lintott. He's the Professor of Astrophysics at the University of Oxford and joins us now. Professor, great to have you back on the programme. Tom just alluding to, of course, the ultimate mission here of establishing a base on the south side of the moon. Why do we want to do that? What will we find there?
Well, I think it's one of the most interesting places in the solar system. The south pole of the moon was hit by a large impactor maybe 2, maybe 3 billion years ago, and it created this huge depression. So there's fascinating science to do about the history of the solar system. It's also a logistically useful place. We think there's water incorporated in the lunar soil down there, and from water, obviously, that's useful for astronauts, but you can also make rocket fuel from it. So if we want a staging post to explore the rest of the solar system, that's the place that everyone's thinking of. I have to say, I mean, last night's mission was amazing. I'm following along avidly, but I think we're a long way from a base or a landing. The best case scenario is a couple of years before a landing, and much of the technology needed for that hasn't even been tested once yet. In particular, we don't yet have a lander capable of taking astronauts down to the surface. So this is a good start, but there's lots more work to do.
And a lot of people watching might think, well, I'm really surprised by that. We saw people walking on the moon in the 1960s. So why has there been this long gap, and why this impetus to try to do it again now?
So I think it's partly money. These are expensive missions. I think the cost for last night's mission, or for the mission that's underway now, is about $4 billion, which is a lot of money for any space program. It's also, I think, this ambition. I think the Apollo era was inspirational and fantastic, but it was about putting a flag on the surface, picking up some admittedly very useful rocks and bringing them back. Here, if we're going back, there's a real sense from all space agencies that we want to go back and stay and make a presence in and around lunar space. And so that's a much, much more complicated mission than anything that was attempted 50 years ago. And it's enabled by the capabilities of the modern rocket that we saw work so well last night. And also, I was really struck by, this is a 21st century mission with computing. There was so much data being transferred back and forth from astronaut to ground and ground back to spacecraft. Whereas, you know, my mobile phone can outperform the Apollo era computers. So this is a highly advanced rocket, very different from what we had before, even if it looks the same and it does the same job.
Professor, who are the best at this? And I guess it's happening with some international partnership, but at a moment, of course, on Earth where tensions are rising. Are the Americans comfortably ahead or not?
Well, I think we do have a space race. That's one of the reasons that I think this is happening now, in that China has plans to go back to the moon. They've sent an amazing set of uncrewed missions, including, for example, the first return samples from the far side of the moon, which have been scientifically fascinating. Their plans for crewed missions to the moon are relatively obscure, at least outside China. Dates in the early 2030s are bandied around. So there is a race going on here. But we should remember this isn't just an American mission. There are contributions, obviously, from the Canadian Space Agency, but also the engine that's currently active on the spacecraft is the European contribution from the European Space Agency, which, of course, includes us in the UK. And it's that engine that will make a burn later today to raise the orbit still further, and which will make the burn that will hopefully, in the early hours of tomorrow morning, send the astronauts into their trip around the moon. So this is an international mission. For all the American flag waving and you know, NASA's pride in what they're doing, this is a cooperative mission.
And Chris, you're a professor of astrophysics and far too young to remember the moon landings from the 60s. But do you think that young people today watching this will be inspired to follow the kind of career that you've had, or perhaps that Helen has had, by watching this? I mean, how much is that part of this, inspiring young people to get into science?
It's very striking. When you listen to the astronauts, they tell you that's why they're going. The point of doing this is inspiration rather than any particular scientific return from this mission. So I hope it is inspiring. I think there is a difference between a mission like this, where we've had people come together and it's a big international, national effort to do something that's astounding, compared to sort of recent space coverage, which has been essentially billionaires in space yachts tootling about low Earth orbit. It's clear from talking to kids that that's not inspirational. I'm hoping a collective mission to do something extraordinary like this. And the bravery of the astronauts sitting on top of this thing, I think, must be inspiring.
Well, Chris Lintott, really lovely to hear from you this morning, Professor of Astrophysics at the University of Oxford.
Yeah, certainly seemed very inspiring. You certainly got a little bit of a laugh and smile from Tom and Helen here with us to that last answer. We're going to continue our discussion with them in just a moment. But first, let's just relive that extraordinary excitement from last night. Thomas Moore reports from Florida.
Lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff. The crew of Artemis II now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
NASA's most powerful ever rocket rose from Launch Pad 39B on a fiery tail. Its first flight with a crew on board, 4 astronauts having the ride of their lives.
On, pumps fully on.
5 hours earlier, they were zipped into their survival suits. Victor Glover, Christina Cook, Canadian Jeremy Hansen, and their commander Reid Wiseman. They emerged from the building where they'd been quarantined in the run-up to launch, cheered by their families. A last chance for goodbyes, 4 humans leaving behind their earthly ties as they began their epic journey. They were greeted at the launch tower by the team that would strap them into the Orion capsule, no bigger than a camper van, and their home for the next 10 days.
For the entire crew, ComCheck on Orion to Earth 1.
Then, with 10 minutes on the clock, the launch director, the first woman in charge of a moonshot, rallied the crew.
On this historic mission, you take with you the heart of this Artemis team, the daring spirit of the American people and our partners across the globe, and the hopes and dreams of a new generation. Good luck. Godspeed, Artemis II. Let's go.
10, 9, 8.
Then liftoff.
RS-25 engines lit.
8 million pounds of thrust pushing the mammoth rocket skywards.
I can feel the rumble coming across the water there. Extraordinary sound. The vibrations in my chest. That bright light, the fiery trail. It's crackling. That is the most extraordinary sound. The crackle as the rocket powers off the ground. You can feel it in your chest. And the bright light, it's almost like the sun.
Technical problems forced the cancellation of launch plans earlier this year, but this was textbook. 8 minutes later, the main engines cut out, and they were in space. But the NASA chief can't relax yet. What were your feelings watching your crew rising above Pad 39B? And do you feel that extra sense of responsibility for the crew as they head further into space?
It is far less stressful to be strapped into the rocket than to be responsible for it here on Earth. So I definitely had those feelings quite a bit. But, you know, you derive a lot of confidence from the process that leads up to this moment.
2 German astronauts had added interest in the launch.
Just seeing this rocket light up and then being 6 kilometers away, right? Sound takes almost 20 seconds until it arrives, and then when it's there, it just hits you like a sledgehammer. It rattles, it shakes you.
One of them will get the first European seat on a future mission, perhaps landing on the moon. I'm just loving the smiles on your faces. So you really wanted to be on board, right?
Definitely. It's like it's a perfect adventure, and it's the beginning of a new era. I think most people don't realize, like, from today on, like, mankind will return to the moon.
The crew are on a 700,000-mile test flight to loop around the moon, already in an orbit far higher than the International Space Station. A chance to soak up the experience before heading into deep space later today.
It was an amazing ride uphill. The views, we've got 2 moon rises that we've had so far, and the views of planet Earth. We've circled it completely, and we forgot how beautiful it is to look down on Earth.
The mission has already made history. For the first time, a woman, a person of colour, and a non-American has left low Earth orbit. NASA is going back to the moon, this time far more representative of all humanity. Thomas Moore, Sky News, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Well, Helen and Tom are still here with us, and I think we can see some of the latest pictures that we have got that we can play out to people now. But as we look at those, tell us, Helen, a little bit about what it's going to be like for the astronauts inside that capsule, and especially perhaps for Jeremy Hansen, who, for him, it's a new experience.
So they're really starting to adapt now to feeling weightless. The body is amazing, actually. So our body fluids, instead of being pulled down towards our feet by gravity, as we're accustomed to on Earth, our bodies adapt by having a bit more fluid in our upper chest and head. Last 2 or 3 days, you feel a bit bunged up, but then after 2 or 3 days, the body adapts to that, redistributes the fluid. You might lose a bit more in the toilet, and you feel a bit more normal. But there are some changes that continue, so the astronauts will be continuing to investigate that. But that's a continuation of really what we know a lot of from International Space Station. But no, for Jeremy, you're right, he's not felt that before. He doesn't know if he's going to feel sick. So without taking any anti-sickness medication, about half of all people who go into space not actually feel nauseous, but actually vomit. So it's just this idea that it's motion sickness. It's the same kind of thing, because your balance system in your ears is sending your brain the same signals as it was before. It affects the vagus nerve, and we feel not well. So, and of course, if you're not feeling well, then generally you're not being able to work very efficiently. So hence it's why it's really good to take some of the drugs sometimes to feel as best as you can. But Jeremy, he just is learning. He's been great in the training, so a lot of what I've noticed in his interviews, he has mentioned things like, well, you can see it's a bit cramped here, but when we feel weightless, we'll be able to use all of this space. All of this room inside the spacecraft.
And he's very tall, isn't he?
He's amazingly tall. He's the tallest one, and he's very aware. He's acutely aware of his size. It's not so much his seat-to-head height, so much, but his legs are really long. So he will have felt that quite a lot, sort of bending up in the seat. And of course, whenever he has to manoeuvre, whenever he's doing the exercise, when he's doing some of these big lifts, sort of the squats and so on, and then standing up, his head will be going right up into the docking port. So yeah, he's going to have to get used to all of that, and they'll have to cope with him as well, of course.
Yeah, work around him.
Tom, tell us what's on the agenda for them in the coming days, and how long of the whole 10 days, how long does it take to go from Earth to the moon?
So it's 4 days-ish to get out there.
Quite a long way.
And back. It's quite a long way, and let's remember they're going very fast. 220,000 miles to the moon, or something like that. 230. It obviously depends on where it is in its orbit and their trajectory. But yeah, it's a long journey, and it takes time. So they've got a bit of time to not kill, because they've got a lot to do in that time. So when they wake up, they're jumping on their exercise machine. This is not like on the ISS where there's space for lots of equipment. They basically have to unpack a kind of folding flywheel type device, allows them to do some sort of rowing machine type stuff and some resistance exercises. So that's important for their well-being, but also to test life support things on the mission. As Helen was saying earlier, that's going to have knock-on effects on other systems. They want to check everything is working well, dealing with the impacts of other things. They had some telemetry issues we were just hearing about in the press conference earlier. They're trying to solve. Once they're happy, and only if they're happy, the next big step is the translunar injection burn, as it's known, and that's a burn from the rocket. On that live picture we were just seeing, that was the back end of the spacecraft. The Orion capsule's on top. What we can see there is the end of the European service module, and that's the thrust of the rocket that's going to send them off towards the moon. But they won't do that unless they're sure it's all working.
Incredible stuff. We are out of time. Tom and Helen, thank you so much for taking us through day one of this extraordinary mission. We will, of course, have regular updates and regular special programmes at 9:30 every morning.